Ann Lenihan. I'm from Elkhorn and represent Legislative District 39. I serve as chair of this committee. The committee will, okay, here we go. So, okay, to better facilitate today's proceedings, I ask you abide by the following procedures. Please turn off cell phones. I think you all know these rules, but if you, do they need to complete the green form today?
Yes.
Okay. If you will be testifying, please complete the green form and hand the page when you come up to testify. If you have written materials that you would like to distribute to the committee, please hand them to the page to distribute. We will need 12 copies for all committee members and staff. If you need additional copies, please ask a page to make copies for you. Now, when you begin to testify, please state and spell your name for the record. We'll go, are we going to use the 5-minute rule?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, and then there'll be speak directly into the microphone so our transcribers are able to hear your testimony clearly. To my immediate right is Committee Counsel Mary Jane Edgar Edson. To my immediate left is Research Analyst Kay Berquist. And to the left at the end of the table is Committee Clerk Grant Latimer. Now I will have committee members introduce themselves, beginning at my far right.
Good morning. Rich Falls, District 31. Stretched out a little bit longer now in the future.
Okay. Oh,
The
new district.
The new district, a little longer.
Kurt Friesen, District 34, Hamilton, Merritt, Nance, part of Hall County, and my district didn't change very much at all.
Don't say that. Everybody's changed.
Not much at all, but it's good.
Brett Lindstrom, District 18. No, I don't.
Well, don't say that out loud. We might have a problem.
No.
Oh, you can do it now.
Oh, sorry, I just opened up a can of worms. I'm good. I'm good.
Grant, I thought we fixed
You
that.
started. It was
It was what?
It's fine.
Your district is now the whole state anyway.
That's right.
Yes.
Joni Albright, District 17, Wayne, Thurston, and Dakota counties, and just a smidgen of Dixon County after yesterday. So, thank you.
Our pages. Could you
That's a
ladies
good
stand
thing.
up, please? So they can see who you are. Katie is a junior at UNL studying sociology and political science. That's a good mix. Caroline, senior at UNL studying political science and Spanish. Okay, please remember that senators may come and go during our hearing as they have, it's not true either. Okay, we need to speak directly into the microphones. And Senator Breezy, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Could you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, Tom Breeze there, represent District 41.
Okay, and I'm going to. Lindstrom and members of the Revenue Committee. My name is Lou Ann Lenihan, spelled Louannenlehan. I'm here to introduce LR 261. I should note that this is committee resolution that all of us signed near the end of session. The real session, not yesterday. I realize there was some fatigue around studying. There is some fatigue around studying our tax policy. And I know for a fact there's a total fatigue from our special session that just finished yesterday. But we do need to refocus ourselves on tax reform. We seem to discuss it year in and year out, but we only manage changes at the edges, whereas I've come to call them Band-Aids. This past session, we did a little bit better than Band-Aids, but we still couldn't fully commit to exempting Social Security income or reducing the corporate income tax rate because of fiscal fears. But if you're constantly using patches to fix a broken system, you end up with what we have, a 1967 tax code covered in a patchwork of fixes that make our tax code complicated, hard to administer, and leaving everyone in the dark, thinking they're paying for more, leaving everyone thinking they're paying for more than their fair share. What do I mean by Band-Aids? Here are 4 examples. Example number 1, incentives. In the 1980s, we passed LB 775. The early 2000s, we passed the Nebraska Advantage Act. and most recently, the Imagine Nebraska Act. We depend on incentive packages to keep businesses in Nebraska because our income taxes are too high. If we didn't have an incentive package, it's doubtful that several of our large employers would still be in Nebraska. But no one thinks depending on an incentive program is the best way to attract or keep employers in Nebraska. Incentives are complicated, they're not popular with Nebraskans, nor are they transparent. Example number 2, the Property Tax Credit Fund. This fund is now at 300 plus the new gambling revenue. I think it's actually 313 million plus new gambling revenue. The money is sent to the counties to reimburse the local taxing authorities for reducing property taxes. Most Nebraskans have no idea how this works and do not understand that the state uses income and sales tax to reimburse schools, cities, counties, and other property taxing entities. Example number 3, the Property Tax Incentive Refund. This is a refundable tax credit based on the amount of general fund school taxes paid. But first you have to pay your property taxes, then a portion is refunded by the state as a refundable credit against your income taxes. The first year incentive totaled $125 million. This year, it's just over $548 million. Example number 4, the homestead exemption. This program now costs the state over $105 million per year. It's also reimbursed by the state with sales and income taxes. These 3 property tax relief programs will total more than $953 million this fiscal year, all paid for by income and sales taxes. So we have a tax policy that's not transparent, it's difficult to administer and comply with, and we're still left with high tax rates. Since 1962, there have been multiple studies of our tax policy. The McClellan study, done in 1962 before the voters repealed the statewide property tax and replaced it with income and sales taxes. The Syracuse study, the most comprehensive study of our state and local tax policies, which was completed in 1988. The Nebraska Tax Policy Commission, commonly referred to as the Berlin Commission, was done in 2007. And finally, the Tax Modernization Committee, TaxMod, this included public hearings across Nebraska and was done during the 2013 interim. We've had enough studies, they all say the same thing, broaden the base and lower the rates. Our state tax revenues continue to exceed expectations, as they have done over the last few years, even with the pandemic. And I want to thank the governor and the legislature. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Linehan and members of the Revenue Committee. My name is Brian Sloan, spelled B-R-Y-A-N-S-L-O-N-E, and I'm the president of the Nebraska Chamber of Commerce and Industry. I'm testifying with regard to LR 261, a resolution authorizing an interim study examining the structure and administration of our tax system. I have submitted written testimony, so with your permission, I'll summarize and not read my testimony into the record as such. As Chair Lynn had noted, the issue of tax modernization and the need for tax modernization is indeed decades old. This is a very old debate where battle lines have often been drawn for many years now. But the urgency of tax modernization is probably more important today than it's ever been. Recently, the Blueprint Nebraska organization followed up on its 2019 report, identifying tax modernization as one of the top 15 initiatives we needed to take from an economic strategy standpoint, with a conceptual proposal, which I'm sure you're going to hear much more about today. What's interesting in that blueprint proposal and sort of sets up a broader discussion that I'd like to have today is that the proposal includes what I would call the rebalancing of the three-legged stool, a conversation that we've also had for decades, the balancing of sales tax, income taxes, and property taxes. For decades, Nebraska has been heavily balanced towards income taxes and property taxes and not so much sales taxes when you compare it to other states. But the blueprint proposal that will be discussed, I'm sure, later today also does some other things. It identifies economic growth as a basis for continued reduction of taxes. Indeed, any tax modernization plan should include a very significant economic growth prospect. And what's unique about the blueprint proposal is they put an economic model, they build an economic model behind it. And we do think economic modeling is the key to this process because ultimately some significant portion of the revenues necessary for tax modernization over time will have to come from enhanced economic growth. Just as importantly, the blueprint conceptual proposal is focused on some things that are unique to our state and very important for our state and indeed appear as core concepts in the blueprint proposal. One is attracting 18 to 34-year-olds and the other is attracting more technology and research, particularly in our core industries, ag, manufacturing, transportation, logistics, banking, finance, to this state in order to be competitive. But as I traveled the state this summer, it was clear in every community that I went to that workforce shortages have become the most significant impediment to community economic health and vitality throughout the state. There was not a single community I went to this summer where workforce was not the number one issue. And so this business of attracting young people to our state becomes very important, not only in terms of our other legislative priorities, but also in tax modernization. On the second page of my testimony, to be responsive to the committee's request so what are the items that we should specifically consider as we draft tax modernization and consider rebalancing the three-legged stool. We published in our public with a set of guardrails that include the following, and I will read these. That any legislation must reduce income taxes to competitive national levels. At the present time, to be competitive nationally, it's my personal opinion that top individual tax rate needs to get down to between 4.0 and 5.0% to truly put us in a competitive situation with peer states. 2, corporate income tax rates should be reduced not to exceed individual rates in any proposal. And 3rd, I'm going to move to the sales taxes issues, and you can read the others. But with respect to sales taxes, the same transactions should not be taxed twice. That includes business inputs and trade-ins. And that we do need to do a survey of our surrounding states to make sure our sales tax exemptions are competitive so we do not cause dislocation of businesses. And with that, I'll finish with the axiom that what you tax, you're generally going to get less of. We remain opposed to the notion of the consumption tax or the epic tax. At the rates that would be required, it would simply move our businesses and our revenues to our surrounding states as business would move and goods and services would be higher taxed. And so with that, Chair Linehan, I will be happy to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Sloan. Are there questions from the committee? Yes, Senator Friesen.
Thank you, Chairman Linehan. On the federal level, we keep hearing the proposals now in front of our national legislators, and everybody keeps saying how we should tax corporations more, tax those rich, evil corporations. How do you respond to that? I mean, we've always heard the phrase corporations don't pay taxes, they collect taxes. So how does that impact our taxes here and how we should look at corporate taxes?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think there's two pieces to that answer. One, our federal tax system is largely built upon collection points once you get beyond individual taxes, and corporate taxes are indeed a collection point. And economically, ultimately, corporate taxes are ultimately borne by either the shareholders, the consumers who buy products or services from those corporations, which would be individuals again. And ultimately, the burden of those taxes flows through to one of those two groups. The corporate entity is not a individual taxpayer in itself, but ultimately those costs will go through. The second piece is, in the last 30 years, the tax world has changed with the development of LLCs, limited liability companies, and the flow through taxation. Anymore, 90% or more of new businesses are formed as LLCs and flow throughs. So you're going to see increasingly the amounts of business taxes collected through the individual tax system rather than the corporate system. And so it's really important to marry those two rates, in my mind, as a policy matter. Because if you have two similarly situated businesses with the same revenues in the same community, and one's an LLC and one's a corporation, it makes no sense to tax one more than the other just simply because we have a different collection point.
Does the difference between an LLC and a C Corp, so if you would form a business today, everybody says you would form it under the LLC form. So at some point, does the size of a business mandate that it would go to a C Corp or publicly traded, or are there changes that are kind of forced as you get bigger?
And sometimes it's size, certainly to go public, to be a public company requires C Corp status to be listed. When I, in my prior life as a business lawyer, you would generally become a C Corp largely because of either capital formation, either you had thousands and thousands of capital investors, but more likely for governance reasons. And even in family business situations, there was the exception rather than the rule, but there were times that I would recommend a corporation because it has much more, how would I say it, organized and structured governance procedures. And sometimes senator and family businesses or other businesses, that's helpful.
So if you were to say who pays the taxes on a corporation, you mentioned shareholders could pay some, but it's basically the fiduciary duty of the board to make sure the shareholders are taken care of. So in the end, wouldn't it be the customers of the clients?
I would say, and studies would show that the customers pay a very large segment of that. I would also say the boards have a fiduciary duty to make sure that the products and services are competitive for that company. And so it's not totally elastic. Every company has competition out there, and prices set by competition. And so to the extent that those prices are not elastic, ultimately the shareholders do bear that. And ultimately shareholders, in one way or form, flow back through to individuals.
So under our current tax policy in Nebraska here, do C Corps, when they earn money outside the state, if you would have a C Corp formed here, but all of your income comes from outside the state, do you pay Nebraska taxes?
Generally, no. We use a sales apportionment factor, and so we calculate based on sales within the state.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Friesen. Senator Boster.
Thank you, Chair Linehan. Sort of follow up on Senator Friesen's questions. Is it fair to say that a significant amount of our corporate income tax revenues come from essentially out of state, from businesses headquartered, located out of state?
I don't know that answer for sure, and I would hesitate to make that assumption. Certainly, some of the larger corporations in the country have operations in Nebraska, but we have some very large domestic corporations in Nebraska, so I don't know that data set.
And even the large corporations in Nebraska, if they are a significantly large corporation, I would imagine that the majority of their sales are not in Nebraska.
Not necessarily. I do understand what you're saying. If they're global, international, and national companies selling products and services, typically a very large portion would not be in Nebraska, but we have large corporations who serve Nebraska, depending on your definition of large, Senator.
So I think personal income taxes, property taxes certainly are almost entirely borne by Nebraskans. Sales taxes can be paid by people coming and visiting the state. And then, of course, corporate taxes can also be paid by non-Nebraskans. So as representatives of Nebraskans, why should we reduce a tax that ultimately, if we are trying to be revenue neutral, we have to raise something else? Why would we reduce a tax that is limiting the burden on Nebraskans because some of it is being paid for by non-Nebraskans? From the perspective of representing Nebraskans.
Right. So again, typically a tax system will be largely territorial, which will mean that those sales that trigger taxation, it's not perfect, but generally the sales that trigger the taxation will have occurred in Nebraska. And so I'll use South Dakota as an example. South Dakota, as you know, has no income tax whatsoever and basically funds the state through sales taxes. And it does so through phenomenal amounts of tourism per capita in South Dakota. So to the extent of what you're talking about, where you're trying to tax people not living in the in Nebraska and have them bear some part of that sales taxes, obviously is one of those. From a corporate tax standpoint, ultimately in a corporate world, there's a collection point at the corporate side, and those are allocated by sales. What gets taxed to individuals then becomes where those sales occur, generally speaking. And so those would have occurred in Nebraska, which creates, just like in South Dakota, Nebraska jobs and Nebraska healthy communities. And so by reducing the corporate taxes in Nebraska and making them competitive with other states, which they are not currently, it allows for the jobs and
It's a-
I was
May I have your attention, please?
It's not real.
May I have your attention, please? There has been a fire alarm reported in the building. There has been a fire alarm reported in the building. Please proceed to the stairways and exit the building. Do not use the elevators, but proceed to the stairways and exit the building. May I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please? There has been a fire alarm reported in the building. There has been a fire alarm reported in the building. Please proceed to the stairways and exit the building. Do not use the elevators, but proceed to the stairways and exit the building. May I have your attention, please?
Oh, my.
May I have your attention, please? There has been a fire alarm reported in the building. There has been a fire alarm reported in the building. Please proceed to the stairways and exit the building.
So Senator, I believe that was my staff telling me my answer was way too long. In short, unlike the federal system, for the state system, the other piece that we always have to recognize is that we're in competition with all other 50 states. And to the extent we're uncompetitive, businesses simply vote with their feet and move out of the state.
So I appreciate that. And that's something that, certainly on this committee, we hear a lot about. And in truth, I'm just trying to understand it more comprehensively.
May I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please? Fire alarm, false alarm, all clear.
So, in order to help me understand it better, if you're a business located outside of Nebraska and you're a national business, an international business, what have you, and you sell nationally, including into Nebraska, you're currently paying our corporate taxes. If you were to move your business into Nebraska and still you sell nationally, you sell globally, what have you. Presuming that your share of sales, because of where your headquarters is located, isn't changing, is there actually a disincentive to you moving your headquarters into Nebraska based on our corporate tax rate, considering, from my understanding, you're paying the same thing either way? I said wrong, that's what I'm just trying to understand.
No, I understand what you're saying. Is it based on a sales apportionment factor you would generally believe. Now, once you move a headquarters to Nebraska, there's all sorts of other things that happen. And so you also move jobs to Nebraska, and suddenly that individual rate becomes really important to whether you're going to move those jobs to Nebraska, or you're either going to move them to Texas or Florida or someplace else. Also, the construction and the infrastructure that goes around that, you think of some of the headquarters that we have pretty significant economic effects to the state. And the taxes, including property taxes related to those items, also play into it.
And I think that I completely understand. The idea that you wouldn't necessarily, the individual income tax rate makes sense for moving jobs, the property tax rate, all of that stuff. But from a purely corporate tax rate perspective, that's where I still am, I guess, trying to understand when we talk about competition, how we do sales apportionment, how competition really plays into that. But anyway, thank you very much.
And the other thing I would add, if you're a services company, your sales would generally occur where your services are provided. So it's more problematical in a service company.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Bostar. Are there other questions on the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much. for
Thank
being
you,
here.
Chair.
Good morning.
Good morning, Chairman Linehan, and members of the Revenue Committee. For the record, I am Steve Saline, S-T-E-V-E-S-E-L-I-N-E, here today representing the Greater Omaha Chamber as a former chairman of the Chamber and as a former chairman of our Public Policy Council. Thank you for your committee's invitation to offer comments on the taxation policy in Nebraska. Before I address the committee's questions, I want to emphasize that the Omaha business community believes that the most important challenge to our city and region and state is recruitment and retention of talent. Addressing the problem of the brain drain and stemming the loss of our state's most valuable resource, our children, must be the angle through which we prioritize any potential changes in our state tax policy. And I appreciate the committee providing us with questions. If it's okay, we'll just go through each one of those. To the first question, we recognize that the property tax has been a long-term and significant burden across the state for decades. It has been a negative impact on all sectors, agricultural, residential, and commercial. Having said that, the legislature has invested significant resources over the past several years, and especially since LB 1107, to address the property tax burden of Nebraskans. Recent projections show state contributions to the property tax issue to be quickly approaching $1 billion, or approximately 22% of our state budget. This is why we suggest that state policymakers turn their focus to the income tax. We need to be focused on creating the most competitive income tax possible while still meeting our obligations as a state. We need to be competitive with our surrounding states as well as other like-situated states that frequently compete against us, such as North Carolina, Tennessee, and Texas. Feedback from our members indicates that the sales tax and property tax are not of lesser concern, not totally, obviously still concerned, but of lesser concern to our members than the income tax. As to the second question, historically, we've been supportive of base expansion of the sales tax if such expansion is done in a comprehensive manner. We also support the continued exclusion of business and agricultural inputs from taxation in recognition of the move from a goods-based economy to a service-based economy over the last several decades. Services should also be on the table for expanded taxation. Our taxation system should be reflective of our current economic realities. Finally, we believe that any revenue stream from comprehensive expansion of the base must be placed on lowering corporate and individual rates down together to the lowest extent possible. We believe an income tax rate below 5% and closer to 4% would be ideal for Nebraska's competitive stance. We appreciate the committee's work to examine Nebraska's tax systems and stand ready to partner with you as you move forward to improve our current situation. The work will not be easy, but is critically important to the growth of our state. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Saline. Are there questions from the committee? Senator Friesen.
Thank you, Chairwoman Linehan. So you mentioned we need to attract people back to the state, and statewide, Mr. Sloan indicated too that we have a severe housing shortage. And do you feel our property taxes that currently are out there are an impediment to getting that housing that we need? I mean, because people keep saying, I get my house, it's paid for, but I continue to pay for it because property taxes are so high. And so I know there's, we're given a rebate, but like they mentioned earlier, you first pay your taxes and then you get the rebate later on in the year. But with that housing shortage, it seems like it's severe across all of the state, whether you're in the rural areas, smaller towns, larger towns, it's everywhere. And so what is the best way to address that housing shortage? Because we got to have people have a place to live when they move, whether it's commercial apartment buildings or anything. What is the number one thing that'll drive that housing industry, I guess, to provide enough housing?
So the housing industry is driven by a number of factors, property taxes, but primarily the question is what we're talking about primarily, which is population growth. And to the extent that real estate developers see population growth, they are going to build and solve the housing problem. I understand that tax policy plays into it. It is right now, at least according to our members, we find that the rates for housing in the metropolitan area are going up higher than they should be, no question about that, but less than our competitive states. So for us, in terms of attracting people to the state of Nebraska, it isn't housing that's driving the issue. It's the continuous, can we get more jobs into the state, and can we get more people that, our kids, your kids, stay here in the state of Nebraska and make sense. And I personally am competing with Texas. I've got 2 kids in Texas right now, and I'm trying to get them to come back to Nebraska, doing everything I possibly can, offering them jobs and stuff like that. But literally, to get them back to the state of Nebraska, we have to pay them 6.84% more than we do in Texas, because frankly, they're not paying any income tax in the state of Texas.
Well, I agree. Most of my kids have finally moved back to Nebraska, but it was housing costs in California were just ridiculous. Housing in DC, you can move back here, you can buy a house 3 times the size, but you still pay more, or probably a little more in property taxes again yet. But again, it goes, if we're going to try to attract people, we're short of housing, and the price is going up, and there's not enough builders out there. Every city has indicated a shortage of lots of housing. And so, how do we, at some point, we all know it's going to catch up, and we'll have a bust again, and it happens in those cycles. But it seems like we're a long ways off with our unemployment at 2%, record lows. We've got to have housing for these people that we want to move back to be here.
And I agree with you, and especially I recognize that the problem is more severe in some isolated places throughout the state. In Omaha, the issue is more along the lines of when we're competing with Kansas City or Dallas, it isn't the cost of the real estate, it isn't the cost of the rent, if you will, that's driving them away, even though in that rent is the property taxes. It's more the cost of the taxes that they come back to, that they pay when they come back here. So it's always a trade-off. I respect what you're saying, but right now we're blessed, or I don't know how you want to say it, but we have the advantage over a lot of other places in terms of real estate, not in terms of the actual tax rate, but in terms of the actual price of real estate. So what happens when the property taxes are high, it drives the value of the houses down or the apartments down, and that. But right now we're very competitive with all the places that we are seeing other jobs go to and other people go to. We're competitive with them on that basis, but we're not competitive with them on tax basis right now.
So overall, you're saying we're competitive in the housing market as far as costs and attracting them back, no matter how you look at the taxes.
Yeah,
We're
and-
competitive there.
And there's a significant amount of apartment complex construction going on in the Omaha metropolitan area. And I'm not sure about other, but I know Omaha and Lincoln are both got cranes going up all over the place. I haven't been out to Grand Island or any place else lately, but it's happening. And I think the market will satisfy that to the extent that we get the jobs in the state of Nebraska and get the people to stay here.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Friesen. Are there other questions from the committee? Senator Bostow.
Thank you, Chair Linehan. Thank you, sir. And so we heard from Mr. Sloan and yourself about primarily the need for Nebraska to attract and retain a workforce of young people. So I understand that both of you have said if we lower income taxes, that will attract them. I mean, do you think there's anything else the state should be doing to attract and retain talent and young people? Or just lowering taxes and we'll get them?
Well, if we can get mountains moved here, that would really help in terms of getting skis and
Agreed.
resorts and things like that. There's a lot of things. Obviously, I'm supposed to be at the University of Nebraska Foundation Board meeting, but I've come over here to testify instead of going to that. But obviously, I'm supportive of the University of Nebraska, and that's an important part of what we're doing here. And fortunately for me, I'm just testifying on taxes today. I know that you guys have to balance out all the other issues in terms of spending and what you do spend it on. But obviously, I think one of the crown jewels of Nebraska is our educational systems, and to the extent that our higher education becomes better, that keeps people here. The statistics are obvious that people stay within 50 miles of where they get their final degree. That kind of stuff is really important.
I agree with you. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you, Senator Bostow. Are there other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much. Mr.
Someplace
Salim.
Allie's happy.
She is. Good morning.
Good morning, Chairwoman Linehan and members of the Revenue Committee. My name is Jim Smith, Jim Smith, and I am here today as Executive Vice President and Chief Strategy Officer of the Platt Institute. Thank you for scheduling this hearing to examine the structure of Nebraska's tax system and for your ongoing efforts to improve the state's tax environment and competitive standing. As one of 3 Blueprint Nebraska Alliance partners and a supporter of Blueprint's 15-point plan for economic growth, the Platt Institute recognizes there are many factors that drive economic growth and affect our state's competitiveness. These dynamics include our education system, the availability and affordability of housing, broadband connectivity and performance, and the list goes on. But perhaps the single most important factor that influences our economic outlook is our state and local tax system. Unfortunately, Nebraska's state and local tax systems are no longer structured to optimize economic growth or to reflect our current economy for that matter. Currently, we have property taxes predating statehood, an inheritance tax from 1901, a sales tax designed around a Depression-era economy, and business tax incentives built on 1980s economic development concepts. To answer this committee's first question of the portion of the tax system in most need of reform, we believe consideration should be given to a hierarchy of taxes in terms of how they impact our economy. We know that certain taxes are more harmful to economic competitiveness and growth because of the taxpayers' mobility and sensitivity to change. For example, taxes on the most mobile factors in the economy, such as income and capital, have the most negative impact. However, taxes on factors that can't easily be moved, such as land, have less impact. But that does not mean that we should not work towards reducing the tax burden on our most captive taxpayers, the property owner. Regarding the committee's second question on our position on expanding the sales tax base, the Platt Institute supports the careful and strategic broadening of state and local sales tax base. I have included potential targets of this broadening strategy with my testimony. However, such broadening measures should avoid taxes on business inputs, and you've heard that already today, as well as goods and services that harm fixed and low-income segments of the population and workforce. The committee's final question involves the strategy or framework for using the incremental sales tax revenues generated by expanding the base. By using the state's portion of this new revenue to reduce the income tax burden on individuals and businesses, dynamic modeling shows that we can grow the economy by generating new state revenues from factors like population growth, higher wages, and increased investment. This growth and the new local option sales tax dollars can then be used to further reduce Nebraska's property taxes and the burden on the most captive taxpayer. In concluding my remarks, modernizing Nebraska's tax code should have dual outcomes: increasing the competitiveness and growth of Nebraska's diverse statewide economy and reducing the burden on Nebraska's families, farmers, and businesses. With the right approach and design, we believe we can achieve both outcomes without sacrificing the stable and diverse revenue sources needed for government or government's critical services. Thank you again for your time and continued work on behalf of Nebraska's taxpayers. Thank you, Senators.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Senator Smith, are there questions from the committee? So this is you want to explain this chart?
Yes, that's part of the testimony, Senator.
Okay. So Senator Friesen.
I didn't mean to interrupt you, but.
No, that's okay.
Question, but thank you, Chairman Linehan. You mentioned here the new local option sales tax dollars can be used to lower property taxes then, but that, when you broaden that base, that doesn't go to communities that are not large shopping centers. I mean, it is targeted then toward the larger regional shopping centers where they could theoretically provide property tax relief with that increased income. How do you propose spreading that out across the rest of the communities that are not as reliant on sales tax income for their revenue?
Great question, Senator Friesen. Of course, that's the million-dollar question. Though not part of the Strategic Blueprint Nebraska plan, one such approach to doing that is to take the incremental revenues from the newly taxed items or services at the local level, recover those at the state level, and use those dollars for state education, for example, to help to meet the needs of critical government services and allow local governments to reduce the property taxes.
Okay, so you'd target some of that, you said the school funding, but it wouldn't necessarily be state aid to cities.
Well, the state aid to cities, we would not recommend at this point reducing the local option sales tax dollars that the municipalities are currently receiving. Only the incremental dollars would be used for strategic property tax relief.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Friesen. Are there other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much for being here.
Good morning, Doug Kagan, DOUG, KAGAN, 416 South 130th Street, Omaha. representing Nebraska Taxpayers for Freedom. Although our members complain mostly about property taxes, we believe that the legislature should embark on comprehensive tax reform. Examining other state tax trends, we find a definite gravitation towards consumption taxes. These taxes comprise more than the sales tax. They include excise taxes, nuisance taxes on movies, sports events, amusement parks, occupation taxes, sin taxes like cigarette and liquor taxes, and user and permit fees and charges. One first step would eliminate state sales tax exemptions in place since this tax began. Exemptions have multiplied over the years. For instance, the Omaha Zoo, car museums utilize staggered elimination of most exemptions on agriculture, business, lodging, clothing, housing, personal transportation, energy, etc. 25% first year, 50% second year. Exemptions, though, still apply to food, clothing, housing, personal transportation, religious categories, and health and medical expenses. The state sales tax gradually would encompass services, while the total sales tax rate would drop. Again, staggered extension amounts 25% first year, 50% second year, etc. Sales tax extension as part of some consumption taxes we believe should combine with the formula that would lower the property tax burden, such as a cap. Options range from a formula to lower property taxes in order to neutralize a property tax increase caused by a valuation increase on a property, to pegging valuation hikes to the annual area inflation rate plus growth, or only at a specific percentage increase. Work with the public education lobby, as public education consumes most of our property taxes. Reduce or merge corporate and individual income tax rates to make our workforce competitive. Also set differing formulas for urban and rural properties so that our farmers and ranchers see equal property tax relief. Abuse of the nonprofit system in Nebraska is flagrant and begs reform. Many nonprofit businesses like hospitals and medical clinics enjoy tax exempt status for their entire facilities, although many of their services compete with private enterprises for clients and customers. Nonprofits use infrastructure services as streets and sewers and public safety services like private commerce. Institute the payment in lieu of taxes system to tax the profit earning parts of nonprofit businesses to share the property tax burden. Require nonprofits to prove eligibility for exemption. Consumption taxation, I want to interject here, we do not support the fair tax or epic tax, but it avoids double taxation and penalties on savings because the saver not taxed on the amount saved, but taxed only on future consumption financed by the saving. Trending towards this consumption kind of tax, everyone pays taxes with a consumption tax. The tax base is larger because all consumption taxed. If the tax rate sets at the same level for all purchases, individuals who buy more or expensive goods will pay more than those who buy fewer or less expensive goods. Taxes on consumption can raise more revenue at lower rates than income taxes. Empirical data show that a consumption tax could increase the size of the Nebraska economy by about 15% over 10 years. One of the biggest reasons for replacing our current hybrid tax system with a consumption tax is a tremendous boon for the economy because it would eliminate the heavy taxation that the current system places on investments. Investment would rise because a consumption tax would remove the existing steep disincentives for businesses to make new investments and for investors to take the risk to fund them. Higher investment in the economy would create new jobs and increase productivity, which would increase wages. Convenience of payment encourages compliance. Compliance and administration costs would be minimized. This tax is efficient and simple for a state revenue department to implement, even if over several years. If Nebraska abolished or replaced part of the income tax with a consumption tax, it would significantly decrease compliance costs. It eliminates loopholes in the many exceptions and complexities in our current state tax system. Other of our suggestions: restrict tax increment financing to its original intent, fund several local services from the state, and consult experts in the field like the Tax Foundation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kagan. Are there questions from the committee? Senator Bostar.
Thank you, Chair Linehan. Thank you, sir. And maybe I misheard. were you not in favor of the consumption tax, or you are in favor of the consumption tax?
Okay, let me clarify that. Other states like Georgia and North Carolina they're trending towards consumption taxes. They haven't eliminated necessarily completely the income tax or the property tax. They're trending toward it. The reason we don't support the fair tax, or some people call it the epic tax, is we don't think it will work for several reasons. It would be very complicated for the state revenue department to implement. Another thing that has proved difficult, they have something called prebates, and it would be difficult to determine who gets a prebate and who doesn't get a prebate. One big fault we find with it is that it's supposed to tax anything that's new services or new products. So let me give you an example. A lawnmower company wants to assemble lawnmowers, so they go out and buy nuts and bolts. Well, that's a new purchase, so they pay tax on that. So they assemble the lawnmower, they sell the lawnmower to the wholesaler. Okay, the wholesaler is buying a new lawnmower, so they pay the tax on that because it's new. The wholesaler sells the lawnmower to a big box store. And the big box store, it's a new lawnmower, so they pay a tax on it. And then big box store sells to a consumer and they pay the tax on it. So what you're doing is you're adding layers and layers of taxes. And it's very fuzzy about what you consider a new sale. It would also be very detrimental to specific parts of the industry. For instance, who will buy a new house and have to pay a fair tax on it when somebody can go buy a house that's a year old? It would devastate the construction companies. It would devastate new car dealers, because who would buy a new car and pay a huge tax on it when you can buy something that was leased for a year and it's almost new and buy that car instead? So it's very detrimental to certain industries. And I think you'll find that although states are trending towards consumption taxes, like I mentioned, broadening the sales tax, looking at using excise taxes, nuisance taxes, user fees. In other words, the more you buy or the more you use, the more you pay. But the way the epic tax is constructed, it simply won't work. And I don't think you'll find a single state or locality in this country that has adopted it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Boster. Are there other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you.
Kagan. Good morning.
Good morning. Chairman Linehan, members of the Revenue Committee, my name is Chris Hove, CHRIS-HOVE, and I appear before you today on behalf of the Nebraska Bankers Association to provide testimony on issues relating to LR 261. I'm the president and CEO of Nebraska Bank of Commerce in Lincoln, Nebraska, and I'm also the immediate past chairman of the NBA. On behalf of the NBA, I want to express our appreciation for being invited to the table and for the opportunity to comment on issues relating to tax reform. While I'm not speaking on behalf of the Nebraska Independent Community Bankers, the NBA has met with representatives of the NICB, and I believe that our remarks are reflective of their position on these issues. In preparation for this hearing, I've reviewed the topics for discussion which were provided by the Revenue Committee. The response of the NBA to issues and questions presented are as follows. On issue 1, where is tax reform most needed? The NBA position on tax reform is generally guided by what is best in the best interest of our customers, as well as the promotion of economic development and growth of our state. Our business commercial customers would likely benefit most from reductions in individual and corporate income taxes, while our agriculture customers continue to voice their interest and additional property tax relief. On issue number 2, expansion of sales tax base, eliminating exemptions, taxing specific services. While the NBA has traditionally opposed expansion of the sales tax on services, we certainly want to participate in continuing discussions if changes in the existing sales tax system can result in a reduction of the overall tax burden for Nebraska taxpayers, both individuals and businesses. With respect to the issue of taxing specific services, the NBA policy and priorities are based upon the following core principles. First, business-to-business services and business inputs should be exempt from sales tax. Second, any expansion of the sales tax should not place Nebraska businesses at a competitive disadvantage with the businesses in our surrounding states. And lastly, any expansion of the sales tax on services should be coupled with a reduction in other taxes to provide for a reduction in net taxes paid by individuals and businesses. On the third issue, if the sales tax base is expanded, how should increased revenues be utilized? Without taking a position in support or opposition to expanding the sales tax base, if additional revenues are derived from such actions, the NBA would recommend that individual and corporate income tax rates be reduced to enhance our competitiveness with other states, and that efforts to reduce the property tax burden on individuals and businesses should be continued. In closing, the NBA believes that state tax policy must be designed to retain existing businesses and attract new businesses and additional workers to our state. In addition, tax policy should create a revenue stream that is consistent, predictable, and grows with the economy, with tax reporting obligations that are easily calculated and which require limited review or auditing by government entities. However, any tax reform or tax modernization efforts involve a two-sided coin. Sustainable tax relief requires fiscal restraint and limited growth in state and local expenditures. We commend the legislature for having exercised significant fiscal restraint in balancing the state's budget in recent years and limiting the growth of state expenditures in that process. However, we believe that further efforts to restrain local spending are needed in order to maximize the impact of the significant amount of funds that the legislature has directed towards property tax relief. The NBA pledges to work with this committee and the legislature to bring about meaningful tax reform for the benefit of the individuals and businesses in our state. I'd like to thank you once again for allowing us to be a part of the hearing today, and thank you for your service.
Thank you very much. Are there questions from the committee? Senator Pauls and then Senator Friesen.
Thank you, Chair. After listening to your testimony and reading, you'd be satisfied if we really didn't do anything with taxes. You're more interested in cutting. That's how I'm interpreting it. And I'm not saying it's wrong, but you want more fiscal constraints on our part. Hard to disagree with that. What should we do? How should we constrain? What should we be cutting? I mean, it's a fact. We have to be cutting.
I'm really not prepared to answer the statement, but your question. But at the same time, I believe that anything that you cut, you have to, on the other, it's a balancing act for you. And obviously you have to decide what is in the best interest of the state to grow the economy and grow the workforce.
And I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I understand, but as I listen to you and as I read this, you do have some questions on how the taxes, if we do increase sales taxes, be careful what we do, which cannot argue. But I think we're almost at the point, I meant to ask this question early on. We need to talk about how do we stop the spending?
It's a good, very, very good point, because it's got to be balanced. And other than Senator Bostar's comment about bringing in taxes from out of state folks, it's got to be paid for by the people of Nebraska.
And I'm just trying to figure out how is that, because I don't believe the state just going to grow population wise, because if you listen on the floor, the state has grown some degree, but a lot of it has been the Latino population. But there doesn't seem to be much of a reception for that when I listen to some of my peers on the floor. And that's, I don't know if Nebraska really would have increased its population if it had not been for people who look different than you and I.
I'm.
And again, you just caught me because I've been listening.
Sure.
And I understand we need to put a hold on it, but I also heard people say education is very important. That's a big dog in the fight.
Mhm.
And we need to be receptive to people, but I'm listening on the floor and I hear some of my peers saying, if a person doesn't look like me, we really just don't care. And I think that we need to be changing our attitude as a state.
I would agree with you.
Okay.
I certainly
And
agree
again,
with
you
on
just
that.
caught me because I meant to ask this question earlier on.
Yeah.
So I thank you for,
You bet. I can't agree with you more.
Thank you, Senator Paul. Senator Friesen.
Thank you, Chairman Linehan. So you mentioned in here that basically you're saying, we should reduce income taxes and help reduce property taxes. So we do sales tax broadening. If we're going to do it, continue on with both of those kind of people. So there's a proposal out there and there's an LR has been held in education already, I think, or it's going to be held, that says that all commercial and ag land would be removed from property taxes to fund schools. Would businesses be in favor of that, of taking away their property tax obligation to funding schools?
Senator Friesen, I'm sorry,
That's all right.
I don't know enough about the process. I don't know if businesses would be interested in that. I can imagine that.
From a business standpoint, I mean, if you were presented that option to you as a businessman, which would interest you more?
I'm sorry, I can't.
Okay.
I'm not prepared to answer that.
I mean, you do feel it's important to hold down spending.
That's absolutely
That
correct.
should probably be our number one priority.
We're very fortunate here in Nebraska to have such beautiful facilities and wonderful roads, but there's a price to that.
Do you feel we're spending too much?
That's a great question. I really can't answer that, but I think that we look around to other states and you look at us we're very fortunate to have the facilities that we have here.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Friesen. Are there other questions on committee? I read listened and read along to your testimony, and I thought what you were saying was this legislature and the governor have done a fairly decent job over the last few years of keeping the state's expenditures down, but we have a problem or we have a challenge. Not the same thing has been going on at the local level. That's what I thought you were saying.
Yeah.
So last year, we as a committee, with Senator Breezy's bill, and not a constitutional amendment, but legislation, so do it in statute, to limit local spending to 3% plus real growth.
Mhm.
And not putting in the Constitution, because if we do have inflation, which it looks like we're going to, we could adjust that number. But you don't have to answer this now, but I would be very interested in your organization's feeling on that matter, because it does, and I think your testimony touched on this, or maybe it was Mr. Slane's or Sloan's, we're almost to $1 billion in property tax relief at the state level.
Right.
With no control on the expenditures. Do you perceive that as a problem?
I think it's got to all be looked at, and it's a very, very complicated process. So
Let me ask it this way. As a banker, would you have an open line of credit with no control on what was going on in the other end?
Absolutely not.
No, because you would go broke.
That's right. That's
Okay.
right.
Other questions from the committee? Thank you very much for being here. Mr.
Thank you.
Hope. Mhm.
Well, good morning, Chairman Linehan and members of the Revenue Committee. My name is Mark McHargue, M-A-R-K-M-C-H-A-R-G-U-E. I serve as president of Nebraska Farm Bureau, I'm here to share Farm Bureau's perspective on the questions that we were asked to address. Pure and simple, our highest priority is balance in the structure when we think about the tax structure here in Nebraska. You've heard me say that before, and we'll continue to have that message. But we do appreciate, before I kind of get into the 4 questions, is this committee's work on property tax relief already. The fact that we've put a substantial amount of money into the Property Tax Credit Relief Fund, our new 1107, has been very helpful on property tax relief. And I want to make sure that this committee knows that we appreciate that and understand that. But secondly, before we get into the questions, and probably most of you know this as well, but agriculture in Nebraska, our receipts are $21 billion for the state economy, 6.8 billion in ag exports. We are the 3rd largest ag economy in the nation. And that's a pretty big deal for Nebraska being in the center of the country here. We have substantial scale and diversity in livestock, cropping operations. And then one out of every 4 jobs in Nebraska, including a lot of jobs in Lincoln, Omaha, are tied to agriculture. And there's a reference there to a UNL study on that. So just to get into a couple of the questions that was being asked, and I appreciate the committee throwing these questions out because it really helped us formulate some of the comments today. So on the question number 1, what part of the tax system needs to be reformed or significantly reformed? And to address that, I would say even though recent work has been done on property tax burden of both owners of residential, commercial, and agriculture areas, according to the Platt Institute, our effective property tax rate is still the 8th in the country. So there's been a lot of conversation today about competitiveness. And I think when we look at all the tax structures, competitiveness within the property tax sector is also a very viable conversation that we're still interested in. So recent estimates for 2022, so including the significant bump we'll have next year of $548 million in LB 1107 credits, our calculations that property tax from a balanced structure is still about 42% on property tax, 20% on sales tax, income tax about 35%, miscellaneous is in there at about 3%. So still we have a high priority on balancing the structure. According to those numbers, we are not balanced. For agriculture, and when we look at residential and commercial, we need to probably about 800 to 900 million more dollars-ish to kind of get that close to the 3-legged stool that's been talked about several times today. That's our calculations. And we should start doing that by, as mentioned, broadening our sales tax base. Ideally, we would broaden the base on consumer goods and services to really reflect today's economy. We're living in a different economy than we were even 10 years ago. And until we reform our sales tax base or reform our sales tax base, if that can't happen, we still need to be putting money into the property tax credit fund. That's the tier 1, and then also the tier 2. I'm going to talk about exemptions just a little bit. There's 3 documents in the sheets that I gave to you. One outlining just our current state sales tax exemptions. Then there's a document in comparison, our state to our neighboring states from the Platt Institute. And then a list of exemptions from Senator Breezy's LB 1084, which we think a lot of those exemptions are things that we can look at that would generate significant amount of revenue. If those incomes come in from changing our exemptions, we believe that to get that into property tax relief, we need to put more money into state education, and primarily preference basic education funding to ensure that every school actually gets funding, state funding of community colleges versus property tax funding, and then after that, money into tier 1 and tier 2. So with that, I would be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there questions from the committee? State funding on community colleges, would you explain that a little bit, just for the record?
Yeah, so currently, I mean, we pull money of our property tax to pay for community colleges. It's a significant amount. I think we need to have the discussion on whether that should be burdened on property tax or that should be bore by the state. And so that's one of the conversation as we're looking at comprehensive tax reform. I think we need to look at where we're collecting our taxes, where we're spending our taxes, and then are those items appropriate?
And then you want to, just for the record, basic education funding, what you're speaking to.
Yeah, so, the question is, I think the primary question is if we collect more taxes through sales tax, and I think that's been our basic conversation, how do we appropriate that money? It's been talked about, do we put it to lower our income tax rate, or do we put it towards property tax? We would certainly lean towards property tax. We think that because in a competitive nature, being the 8th highest, we're not competitive there. So you lower that competitive nature, I think that will stimulate growth. I think that'll add jobs to the sector, and then that'll continue to roll the economy. But where do we apply that money to actually get it to property tax relief? So we spend a lot of money on schools. And so how do we work that through the formula? And so doing that through basic education funding, you still have to have a mechanism where ultimately, if you put more money into the school system, you have to make sure that your taxes get lowered. I mean, it can't be we can't put more money into the system and not balance it on the other side. So we think that's an appropriate way to get money out to the schools. We would need to ask them to lower their levies and what they ask from property tax along with that.
Thank you. Yes, Senator Friesen.
Thank you, Chairwoman Linehan. So when you talk about the property tax is still number one, but you do mention in there that money should be used also to buy down the income tax rates. And with the money set aside currently, what do you think the ratio would be for property tax, income tax, if we continue to fund the two tiers of property tax relief the same? What would be the ratio of any new revenue coming in? How would you look at that as to what the division would be?
Yeah, I mean, primarily in the testimony, we're kind of talking about priorities, where it would kind of go first. But, we would recognize that probably in any bill to get across the finish line, there would have to be some compromises there. And so, you take a look at, a minimum of, if they want to raise $800 million, we think it takes $800 million just to do the balance. If we can find, 1.6 billion, and if half went to property tax relief and half went to lowering our rate, I think that'd be appropriate. If we're raising much less than that, does it still need to be a 50-50 ratio or not? But I think somewhere in that category, I think you would start getting some support from agriculture.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Friesen. Senator Lidstrom.
Thank you. Quick question, got a couple things.
Sure.
I agree with you on your description on maybe where we're trying to get to. On the property tax credit relief portion, with valuations going up, say double digits, and that's really grown to say single, does your group or members feel like that money could be, in the long term, be repurposed for maybe providing equalization aid for school districts? Are people satisfied with the property tax relief fund as the end all be all to
Sure.
correct it? Is it, I understand where it's at, we put money in there, but
Right.
does it actually fix the long-term problem?
Yeah, I mean, a great question. We are not, we've gone those routes because that seems like maybe it's the easiest way. I don't know. It's been historically, we've done that way, except for 1107. We're not opposed to looking at repurposing a number of those pots of money if we can get that into a comprehensive reform and it still does the same amount of work towards property tax relief. I wouldn't say they're sacred cows at this point, but I think we'd have to be very diligent on how then are we going to do it? What's the plan? I mean, I think you could probably redo that significantly, put it in towards education funding, but they got to have the backside to get it back out against property tax relief. And then, of course, with our organization, primarily looking at the ag sector, does it appropriately and proportionately go back to the ag sector as it would the rest of the economy? But we know that with real estate going up the way it is, we have to think about the labor shortage. I'm in construction as well, and we're building workforce houses and we're building apartments. I mean, my apartments, $125 a month goes to pay property tax. And that's a direct cost to housing, which ultimately goes around to getting labor in. And so we've touched about a lot of those things today. It all works together. It's just figuring out where those tweaks are that we can together agree on, that we can move the state forward.
Thank you, Senator Lindstrom. Other questions? Okay, Senator Albright and then Senator Pauls.
Thank you, Chairman Linehan. And thanks for being here. I really appreciate everybody's comments so far today, because it does help me wrap my head around the fact that not all of us can have everything we want, but yet we do have to act on this. On your second page, when you talk about we should start by broadening the sales tax base to accurately reflect today's economy. And while it could be one thing today and something else tomorrow, but just for the record, when you say business input should not be included in sales tax in your arena, in the agricultural areas, please explain that, because it seems like everybody has, well, we should try this, or we should go to the zoo, or we should talk about that to the group here for the record, so that we understand where your agricultural community is coming from.
Okay, so on page 4, we do have a list of exemptions. And so, where we would stand fundamentally is on our federal tax return, our Schedule F. With an agriculture, we need to make sure and keep those exempted. I mean, the federal government says those are business expenses. And so we need to ensure that stays and those aren't touched. I would say really the business exemptions that we have as a whole in Nebraska that are identified, we would say that we agree generally with the business exemptions that we do currently have. So as we look forward, if it falls under an exemption that we have today relative to business, so like machinery would be a good example. There's conversations about whether a tractor should be exempt. Is that actually a business expense? We would consider a tractor the same as a business that manufactures that, they have a press brake and they're going to exempt that. We consider a tractor the same type of expense that needs to be exempted.
I know when the state chamber comes, or in Omaha, Lincoln, there's lots of other things that happen in their world. But one thing that I don't think a lot of people think about when they want to exempt a lot of stuff that we have to use every day for our business, whether the commodities are high or low, nobody gives us a break when it comes to chemicals or fuels or any of the outputs that we have to take care of. Nothing ever comes down. It always goes up, whether you're coming down. So I think everybody has to understand that all of us are in a situation that we have to protect our own arenas, if you will, our own areas. But as the bankers came in and they have the pulse of their consumers as well. They can come and say, well, we can't meet our obligations because of this or that. We're going to hear from the cities, I'm sure, and the counties, and everyone, has their needs and wants. But I think it's important that we are very careful not to, look for just certain areas of influence when somebody else isn't experiencing the same thing. So I appreciate the testimony and all the information that you put together today.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Senator Pauls.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just curious, since you brought up about exemptions. I'm not trying to take away any exemptions. And I'll say it every year I'm down here, but I will keep talking about it because I think everybody ought to know the whole total picture. Do you have any idea how many dollars in the state of Nebraska we have on egg exemptions? Roughly.
I've been told that a number of times, but it would be, I mean, for example, I mean, cattle feed, that's our livestock feed.
Yeah.
Is one of the big ones at.
But total, just give me a total. Would you say $1 billion?
Probably more than that.
Yeah, okay, that's what I'm just trying to say.
Yeah.
So we are giving exemptions, and also, we all want to protect our own, but myself, having come from a small community, let's say I'm a businessman or a woman in a small community, I have the same issues that the ag person has, because my things go up and down, and as I've looked at a lot of these small communities, and I'm looking at my own, a lot of people, when they went shopping and went to the big city, they should have been shopping at their own little town. I can remember my dad saying that. They need to shop here. They go to Hastings or Salina, Kansas, and all those, and they were spending all that money. But just a couple things that caught my attention, because I've been examining this. Property tax is significant for those of us in the city as well as in the country.
Absolutely.
Big time, because Douglas County, as I reported last year, more property taxes collected in Douglas County than 70 other counties in the state. And then when you put Douglas, Lancaster, Sarpy, they're more than 87 of the other counties, just those 3 counties. So property tax is significant. It's not just in the rural the country. It is a significant issue. But we keep talking about the property tax on ag land. I'm concerned about property tax on residential areas. I think you're also interested in that. We need to start taking a look at that. But this is what intrigued me, because get this from an ag culture, from the Agriculture Department, State of Nebraska, or University. I'm just going to read. We all know agriculture is the pillar of Nebraska economy, that's not a question. But this is what really surprised me. Nebraska's total net farm income has averaged a little over 5% of the state's total personal income. So if I were in the ag business, I'm not too concerned about getting my personal income tax release too low, because I won't, all of us together are only 5% of the state. And there's another thing that really surprised me. And about 7% of the state's gross domestic product in recent years is directly coming from agriculture. That's just that section of the rancher and the farmer. The rest that we talk about is the other products that come from that, like the farm suppliers, merchandisers, food processors, and et cetera, et cetera. But actually, as I talked to one of the senators here, I can see why you probably have a concern about property tax, because if the farm net income is averaging only 5% of the state's total personal income, and 7% of the state's gross domestic product, and they're paying a high property tax, I can see why that is a concern of theirs. But I was amazed at how the income is only 5%, personal income, and the gross is only 7%. But when we start adding in all the other issues, that's when ag really, becomes a major sector. So I think we need to take a look at property tax, and most of the property tax is spent where? On education. So those people in the audience, if you want to cut, looks like education is the place to cut.
The interesting thing that, 5% of the income, but we pay a significant portion of the actual property tax in the state.
That's right. That's
Agriculture. And
right.
to your point,
Yes.
thanks for making
I'm trying
my
to
point, I guess. But
yes, but I'm also making a point. Douglas County has more property tax than 70 other counties together. So it is an issue statewide. And I cannot blame all of the school boards who make, because 80% of this is basically salaries. So we got to find a way, I just don't think increasing the sales of these services is going to increase that much. I don't know. I mean, I see the figures that in the back of the document that we got from the Platt Institute. If you add all of those, it does, mount up some money, but I think.
Of the imbalance, it's really important that of the 900 million, I think we're in balance, 2/3 of that goes to residential. I mean, agriculture is talking about 1/3 of that, but we're talking about significant relief needed for all Nebraskans relative to property owners.
But you're saying how much is that is going to the urban areas?
2/3.
2/3 going to the area. So the rural area is getting 1/3 of the relief.
Yeah.
Well, if you look at most of the property taxes collected in the larger areas too.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, really. That's one reason why I fought to keep Douglas County in the District 2 as a total county, because I think it's significant. Well, enough of that.
Thank you, Senator Pauls. Are there other questions? I have one. $125 a month, you said, for taxes for your apartments. Can you give us a ballpark of what percentage that is?
Yeah, so rent on those are like $875.
$875. So it's over 10%.
Yeah.
So it's significant. So renters do pay property taxes.
Absolutely, they do.
Thank you. Are there other questions? Yes, Senator Pauls.
Yes, then that leads me, because I'm also looking at this. So if I'm a renter, I lease my town. The person who owns the property, he or she gets the tax break. The only break I would get is you don't raise my rates.
Sure.
There are some states where there is a rebate back to the renter. But I mean, yeah, it's a certain income. I mean, if you're well off, you're not going to get it. But if you're a person, you get it. That's in like a number of states have that. And you might see that coming in front of us by chance. I'm glad you threw that at me because I didn't realize.
Thank you. Thank you very much for being here. Appreciate it. What is it, almost there?
Appreciate you.
Can I ask how many people are still going, and I want you to testify, just trying to figure out if we're going to break for lunch or if we're going to wrap this up before lunch. Okay, we'll see how many questions we have. Yeah. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Ken Herz, Kenherz. I have a cow herd and farm near Lawrence, Nebraska. I am an immediate past president of Nebraska Cattlemen, and I'm here to testify for 7 agricultural organizations: Nebraska Cattlemen, Nebraska Farm Bureau, Nebraska Corn Growers, Nebraska State Dairy Association, Nebraska Pork Producers, Nebraska Soybean, and Nebraska Wheat on LR 261. Thank you, Chair Linehan and the Revenue Committee for the opportunity to comment today on Nebraska's tax structure. We look forward to working with the committee, other industries, and groups affected by the potential changes in Nebraska's tax code. It won't be easy, or we would have already done it. And we don't expect to get everything we want, but look forward to the conversation in the spirit of cooperation. We all want to work toward a solution that makes Nebraska more competitive for the agriculture and business communities. To answer the questions posed by the Revenue Committee today, question number 1, which portion of the state and local tax system do you believe in need of most significant reform? It should come as no surprise that the respective members of our organizations believe that property tax reform is a primary section of the state tax code that needs the most significant reform. Governor Ricketts, the legislature, and the Revenue Committee have moved the needle in the right direction regarding the state's property tax issues in the form of property tax relief. While we are grateful for these successful efforts, we believe the next steps should focus on property tax reform. Question 2, there has been much discussion about expanding sales tax base by limiting exemptions. We support the expansion of the sales tax base through the elimination of exemptions and the taxation of services. We draw no specific lines and terms which exemptions should remain, except to say that we agree with Blueprint Nebraska's stance regarding business inputs and believe these inputs should remain exempt. Business inputs should, in general, be broadly defined to avoid double taxation of the ultimate good or service provided by the business. Question 3, is the sales tax base, if the sales tax base is expanded, how should this revenue stream be utilized? For us, this is simple. If the sales tax base was expanded, we believe the funds generated should be used for funding K through 12 to provide an additional source of revenue to reduce the dependence on property taxes for school funding. Question 4, other tax matters you would like to address. In addition to addressing the level of property tax levied for K-12 education, we also feel that the ability for community college to level property taxes should be discussed. Unlike K-12 education, community or technical colleges have revenue sources to balance their budgets and should not have the authority to levy or collect property tax. We also feel the state's role in funding basic education needs continued conversation. This year, school districts in Nebraska will receive over $880 million in equalization aid through Nebraska's school funding formula. While Nebraska's urban school districts receive more than $500 million of these state funds, over 150 Nebraska school districts will receive none. The non-equalized school districts are largely rural, and their property tax basis consists of mostly agricultural property. Because these non-equalized school districts receive no equalization aid, the task of financing their budget falls entirely on local property taxpayers. As ag producers and the owners of agricultural property bear this burden more heavily in non-equalized districts. Modifying how schools are funded to require the state to provide a specific percentage of the basic education needs through state aid will reduce the burden of local property taxpayers, including agriculture producers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there questions? Senator Boster.
Thank you, Chair Linehan. Thank you, sir. You mentioned, and weren't the first to mention, community colleges. Do you have a sense of how much currently community college is paid for through property taxes versus tuition?
I do not know that.
Okay.
Answer that question.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Boster, Mr. Boster, Senator Boster, I'm sorry. Other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much for being here. Appreciate it.
Hi. Good morning, Chairwoman Linehan, members of the Revenue Committee. My name is Craig Beck, that's CraigBeck, and I'm the Senior Fiscal Analyst at Open Sky Policy Institute. I'd like to start by thanking the committee for including us in today's hearing to review Nebraska's tax structure and potential reforms. When it comes to our tax code, we are an outlier in our reliance on property taxes to fund local governments, with Nebraska ranking 47th in state aid to local governments nationally, according to census data. Granted, the legislature has done a lot over the last few years to offset property taxes for taxpayers, both increasing the property tax credit and creating the property tax incentive. These two programs are undoubtedly significant, totaling nearly $850 million in fiscal year 22 alone. However, we're concerned about the sustainability of these programs as they've undeniably been bolstered by strong state revenue growth, in large part due to an influx of federal funds from various stimulus programs. These funds will end eventually, and once that happens, we have significant concerns about revenue decreases leading to difficult choices between funding vital government services and continuing to provide current levels of property tax credits. To ensure we're able to maintain both, we would support broadening the sales tax base to include more services. We've supported broad-based expansions in the past and believe doing so now would help the state maintain a strong fiscal position coming out of the pandemic. We would not, however, support using the base broadening revenue to lower personal or corporate income tax rates. While we agree with the legislature's 2013 Tax Modernization Committee that increasing state aid to local governments is the best way to reduce property taxes, we recognize that this may not be feasible. If it isn't, we generally support measures that improve transparency and better target credits to those needing them most. This could include ensuring the property tax incentive, directly reduces one's property taxes, like the property tax credit does, or implementing a circuit breaker. Finally, I'd like to take some time to talk about the idea that changing the tax code is going to draw thousands of people to Nebraska. Research has not found a conclusive link between taxes and migration, with one study showing that elderly migration patterns were stable from 1970 to 2000, despite changes in many states' tax laws intended to draw retirees. The idea that cutting taxes can drive growth in general is undermined by the experiences of Wisconsin and Minnesota, two remarkably similar states in terms of populations, demographics, culture, and industry composition. After each elected new governors in 2010, they headed down divergent policy paths, with Wisconsin cutting taxes and shrinking government, and Minnesota raising the minimum wage, strengthening its safety net, and increasing investments in infrastructure and education, paid for by taxes largely falling on the wealthy. As of 2017, on virtually every metric, Minnesota workers and families were better off than their counterparts in Wisconsin, according to an Economic Policy Institute report. Minnesota saw stronger growth in wages, jobs, median household income, overall economic growth, growth per worker, and population growth. And despite raising taxes on the wealthy, Minnesota saw no erosion of its income tax base or the taxable income of its wealthy residents, both of which actually grew in the 3 years following the increase. Wisconsin, on the other hand, lagged the national average across most of these metrics and experienced net population loss. One thing that I'd like to touch on really quickly before I end my testimony is we've heard a lot today about the three-legged stool. We look at the three-legged stool as well. We look at it, I think, a little bit differently than the testifiers before me. We use census data and we look at the entirety of taxes levied across the state. So therefore, it is comparable to states across the nation. When we look at, again, all taxes levied, not just those that go to the general fund, we include things like local option sales tax, et cetera. Our stool, particularly when we factor in the Property Tax Incentive Act that, will factor into the fiscal year 22 three-legged stool calculations, our stool shows a much more balanced stool. Again, we have to make some assumptions on revenue growth for fiscal year 22, so I'm not saying that these are actual numbers or what, that they could change, but we're looking, particularly when you factor in that property tax relief, we're looking at about 33% property tax, 31% sales, and 30% income. So again, we thank the committee for the opportunity to participate in this important discussion, and I would be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Beck. Other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much for being here. Good morning.
Good morning, Chairman Linehan, members of the committee. My name is Lynn Rex, Lynnrex, representing the League of Nebraska Municipalities. On September 23, 2021, the League Executive Board met and discussed extensively the questions as posed for this hearing today. I would like to kind of read for you, which I rarely ever do, what their 5 points are, because they spent quite a bit of time reviewing this. And you'll see in your packet that you have the latest data of levies based on the 2020 information presented by municipalities across the state. In addition, you have a list and history of the historic cuts over the years of all of our programs except for the Municipal Equalization Fund. With that being said, here are the 5 points the League of Nebraska Municipalities would like to bring to your attention. Number one, Nebraska's 529 cities and villages need a reliable and sustainable property tax base to fund essential public safety initiatives and other important services and programs for citizens, including maintenance and basically repair of streets, water and sewer lines, libraries, swimming pools, parks, and those types of important quality of life issues. The 252 municipalities with voter-approved local option sales tax also need a reliable and sustainable tax base to fund the significant projects and programs typically identified on the ballot question when those were approved, including the use of local option sales tax to provide property tax relief, and most of them do. By the way, I'll also mention there are 76 municipalities with LB 840 programs for local economic development programs, which are incredibly important in this state. The League supports a broadband and diversified tax base to better reflect Nebraska's increasingly service-based economy. Senators have access to the relevant information to better understand the consequences and the trade-offs of policy choices when expanding, diversifying, or exempting certain parts of the tax base. For decades, cities and villages have been subject to the lid on restricted funds. That's section 13-519. And what's outside of that is in 13-520. And the municipal levy limit of 45 cents per $100 valuation, plus 5 cents for interlocal agreements. And that's in section 77-3442-6A. With an option, one of the things that we think we need to bring to your attention is that these two statutes significantly preclude many municipalities now from two things. One, from hiring enough personnel. We talk police officers, firefighters, utility workers, but it's more than that. We're having a hard time getting our, basically being able to even fund folks if we can find them. B, financing needed projects and programs, including those voter-approved initiatives like LB 840 economic development programs. Clearly, every time the property tax base or the sales tax base is changed, there is a direct effect on the application of those two statutes and the related laws on budgets, programs, and services municipalities financially are able to provide to their citizens. And I think this is extremely important because I know different political subdivisions have a different story to tell you. But this is very important for us based on the levy limits adopted in 1996, which took effect in 1998, the lid laws which passed with LB 299 in 1996, which were supposed to expire in 1998, but continued on. So we have a double cap. We have a cap on the lid on restricted funds. We have a cap on the levy limits. Based on the data reported by cities and villages in 2020, 223 of Nebraska's 529 municipalities have a general fund levy equal to or greater than 45 cents per $100 valuation. 275 municipalities have a levy equal to or greater than 44 cents. That's obviously more than half of our 529 cities and villages. 322 have a levy equal to or greater than 40 cents. Typically, those municipalities with a levy of 45 cents or higher cannot even raise the money to spend the 2.5% lid, basically lid over restricted funds in 13-519, 13-519, that you would allow them to spend if they could even raise it. If the sales tax base is expanded and generates additional revenue, the League respectfully recommends that a significant portion of the revenue be directly allocated to local governments. Doing so would help offset, at least in part, the hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue lost by municipalities and other local governments as exemptions to the property tax base and sales tax base as being granted over the years without reimbursing local governments for the tax base lost. The report to the legislature, LR 155, Tax Authorization Committee of 2013, chaired by Senator Galen Hadley of this committee, then chair, states as follows on page 35, quote, the primary policy option for reducing property tax use recommended by the Syracuse tax study was increased to aid local governments, emphasizing equalization aid for local governments. This was to supplement the then existing aid programs, which had been implemented to offset lost property tax capacity from prior exemptions granted. The recommendation was implemented in part. The pre-existing aid programs, which Syracuse recommended retaining, have been repealed. Oh, I'm sorry. It was in 1987. I'm happy to respond to any questions you have and respond to your last question.
Thank you very much. Other questions?
Thank you.
Questions? Could not today, but over the next few weeks, could you provide to the committee, I know you have a lid on your levies, but there's no lid on the valuations, right? The valuations can go up however much they go up.
Well, but in essence, however the valuations go up or down actually becomes a bit of a non-event because there's a double cap, Senator. So for example, so basically the valuations, no matter what that valuation
is.
is.
To the question. In your, how many cities? 500?
529 municipalities in the state of Nebraska.
529. Could you, or probably the Department of Revenue could provide us if the tax taking has gone up or down and by how much in each of those cities over the last, I don't know, 5 years?
I'm sure they can. I think it's important, though, to understand that and I know you know this, Senator, that in addition to that levy limit, again, roughly half the cities are already at their maximum levy limit of 45 cents plus 5, and half of that half cannot even raise the money to spend the 2.5% of restricted funds over the prior year. When they get an additional 1%
Okay,
on a
but
supermajority
I'm
vote.
Here, that's all helpful. But what people pay is their property taxes.
Correct.
So I think what the committee would be helpful for the committee to see if the tax taking has gone up.
I'm sure I know that there's been an increase in the amount of actual dollars, but not for everyone.
So that's what I would like to see. What are the differences in the 500?
We can try to provide that. And I did want to say too, that it's so important that the League Executive Board wanted to convey to this committee in particular, that how much we appreciate the tremendous work that this committee, the legislature, and the governor has done on property tax relief with the 3 major programs that you outlined in your opening, Senator.
But if tax takings go up, the people that pay the taxes don't actually see the relief. We have to find, I don't know how much tax payments have gone up.
We can do that.
Okay, thank you. Are there other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you
for
very
being
much.
here.
Really appreciate the opportunity today.
You're welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Chairperson Linehan and members of the Revenue Committee. My name is Robert N. Bell. Last name is spelled B-E-L-L. I am the Executive Director and Registered Lobbyist for the Nebraska Insurance Federation. I appreciate the invitation of the committee to discuss impact of taxation on the insurance industry. The Nebraska Insurance Federation is the primary trade association of insurers domiciled or with a significant economic presence in Nebraska. Currently, the Federation consists of 30 member companies and 8 associate members representing a spectrum of insurers from small to Fortune 500 companies. Members write nearly all lines of insurance. One of the goals of the Federation is to promote the concepts and importance of insurance products to policymakers and the public. Nebraska insurers provide high-value, quality insurance products to Nebraskans that help protect Nebraskans during difficult times. Not only do Nebraska insurers provide protections to Nebraskans, but companies also provide high-paying jobs. Members of the Federation alone provide over 14,000 jobs to the Nebraska economy. According to a 2016 study, the insurance industry has had a $14.24 billion impact on the Nebraska economy in 2015. And I wanted to give a shout out to my board president, Sean Pollack from Mutual of Omaha, who came here for moral support. Not that I need moral support to testify in front of the Revenue Committee. Insurance is important to the economy of Nebraska, and Nebraska has become known as a very attractive home for insurance companies for a number of reasons, including the relative ease of working with the legislature on needed regulatory laws and the stellar reputation of the Nebraska Department of Insurance. Another primary reason insurance companies prefer to domicile in Nebraska is the premium tax rate and its implications on Federation member insurance products sold in other states. Since I'm not before the Revenue Committee very much, I'm going to spend most of my time today addressing insurance premium tax and its accompanying retaliatory tax and the importance of each to the insurance industry and Nebraskans in general at a very high level. First, insurance premium tax. Insurance premium tax is a very old tax in Nebraska that goes back to at least the beginning of the 20th century. The statutes governing the taxation of the insurance premiums are currently found in Article 9, Chapter 77 of the Nebraska Revised Statutes. The tax is collected by insurance companies on the gross amount of direct written premiums received by the company during the preceding year. The rate is 1% of the gross amount of direct written premiums for most lines of insurance. The rate is 0.5% for group health and accidents insurance. Annuity contracts and other types of retirement and pension plans are not subject to insurance premium taxation. Premium tax is unique in how it is collected. Tax is due March 1st of each year for the previous year to the Nebraska Department of Insurance and is remitted by the insurance companies. Insurers also are required to make prepayments on April 15th, June 15th, and September 15th in a manner and calculation set forth in Nebraska Revised Statute, Section 77-918. Nebraska Revised Statute Sections 77-912 and 77-913 direct how insurance premium tax is distributed for spending. With some caveats, 50% is sent to the insurance tax fund, 40% to the general fund, and 10% to the mutual finance assistance fund. The insurance tax fund is allocated as follows: 10% to counties, 30% to the municipal equalization fund, and 60% to TIOSA. Second, retaliatory tax. Retaliatory tax is a unique aspect of insurance. In the United States, Congress has ceded jurisdiction of insurance regulation for the most part to the states, including taxation. The McCarran-Ferguson Act enshrined the state regulation of insurance into the United States Code. Because insurance is state regulated, states are free to charge different tax rates to out-of-state insurers. To prevent this from happening, nearly all states have adopted a retaliation statute. Nebraska's is found in the insurance code at Nebraska Revised Statute Section 44-150. In summary, this statute allows the Department of Insurance to charge out-of-state insurers the excess in the amount of taxes, licenses, and fees that a Nebraska insurer would pay in that particular state. More simply put, the retaliatory tax requires an insurer to pay the higher tax rate of its home state or the state where the insurance product is sold. If the tax rate of the out-of-state insurer's home state is higher than the Nebraska's 1%, the Nebraska Department of Insurance will impose a higher tax rate on the out-of-state insurer's insurance product premiums sold in Nebraska. So as an example, Alabama's premium tax rate is 2.3%. An Alabama insurer's products which is sold in Nebraska will have a tax rate of 2.3%, which is the 1% Nebraska premium tax and 1.3% of retaliatory tax. Retaliatory tax is why insurance companies seek to locate in states where insurance premium tax is low, like Nebraska. It provides such companies at the very least a level playing field with other insurers when selling their products in other states. If an insurance company is based in a high premium tax state, their insurance products are already at a competitive disadvantage in a very competitive industry. Retaliatory tax is collected and dispersed in the same manner as premium tax. Together, premium tax and retaliatory tax provide Nebraska with a steady and non-volatile source of revenue to the tune of over $114 million in 2019. Nebraskans benefit from low premium tax in two distinct ways. First, low premium tax help keep Nebraska insurance rates down. While companies technically pay the tax, this tax is obviously passed along to the consumer. Lower premium tax means lower insurance rates for Nebraska. And then second, having a low premium tax rate makes Nebraska a very attractive home for the insurance companies due to the retaliatory requirements in other states. I see I'm out of time, so you can probably read the last half of that provision. Nebraska companies export approximately $135 billion worth of insurance products on an annual basis. So the retaliatory tax, having the low premium tax, means that they're paying lower tax rates in other states on those products. And that's why it is so important, which I think I reiterated like 15 times in my testimony.
Thank you. Thank you.
So anyway.
Yes, Senator Boster.
Thank you, Chair Linehan. Thank you, Mr. Bell. How would the premium tax rate be impacted by something like consumption tax plan?
So with the consumption tax plan as it was presented to the Nebraska State Legislature, it eliminated all taxes, including the premium tax, and put into place a consumption tax. So, and if you read the following legislation, I believe it was LB 133, it talked about the taxation of those insurance premiums at the consumption tax rate, which would be 10%. I think the lowest or the highest tax rate for premium in any state is 4.5. And so instantaneously, Nebraska products, when they're being sold in those other states, would be taxed at a higher rate in those other states. And that tax rate, I mean, it's taxed by other states, it's collected by other states. We don't see that money. We ran the numbers. We believe that had about a $10 billion impact on the insurance industry in Nebraska, which is a little bit of a misnomer because they would all leave the state of Nebraska. They would not stay around. They would take their licenses and they would go to a lower tax state because they would not be able to be competitive being based in Nebraska. So, which is why we have opposed consumption tax historically.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Thank you, Senator Boster. Senator Pauls.
Thank you, Chair. I'm reading the third paragraph. It said, according to a 2016 study, the insurance industry had over $14 billion impact on the economy in 2015.
Right.
Do you have more up to date?
I do not, actually. We believe our industry has grown in the state in the last 4 or 5 years. Economic impact statements or studies are not cheap, so we haven't funded one for a while. It perhaps might be time to fund a new one.
It probably would, because the reason why, I pulled up the Farm Bureau, now you're a little over 14 billion. That's 2015.
Sure.
Farm Bureau said receipts from farms and ranch contribute over 21 billion to our economy and nearly 6.8 billion in agricultural exports. So if they're spending 21 billion to our economy, and in 2015 insurance did 14 billion, it goes to show you the power of insurance. We're talking about, we're an agricultural state, but apparently insurance, it's basically a little over half less. I mean, it's a significant, that's why I wanted more up-to-date figures.
Yeah. I think Nebraska's a big enough state for both ag and insurance. I mean, I think we can both be very successful in the state. And banks too, even banks, they can be successful as well.
Well, they didn't give me their information. I did out loud too.
But we do. So, and I remember when the gentleman from the Farm Bureau said that, because then I said, well, we export $135 billion worth of insurance.
That's another point.
That's very different. They're very different products,
I
obviously.
understand that, but I'm just trying to show you the power. We always talk about the ag being so important.
The financial sector is big in
It's
Nebraska
also-
as well.
okay.
Yes.
As a former chair of banking, I had to push that out there.
I appreciate that, Senator Pauls. You are a great
Thank you.
advocate for our industry.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Pauls. Are there other questions? And on the first page, paragraph, second from the bottom.
The caller, Mike Blood, has left the conference.
Bye, Mike.
I do that to all
I
of the
didn't know he was
senators.
here. Explain the Mutual Finance Assistance Fund, and the Municipal Equalization Fund.
Okay, so the Mutual Finance Assistance Fund is the fund for fire departments. So that is money. There's actually a fire tax. So when I said high level, I'm not going to bore you with all the details of the fire tax, but a portion of that goes back to volunteer fire departments, professional fire departments throughout the state. I'm not terribly familiar with all the details of how that distribution works, but that's
But it goes to fire department.
Yes.
Then where does the Municipal Equalization Fund go?
I believe that goes to cities. Or at least it used to go to cities. Whether or not that statute's been updated, I did not look before the hearing. My apologies.
Okay.
I'm sure Lynn would know.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Other questions from the committee? Thank you very much for being here.
You're welcome. Oh, and I was going to say thank you for 1107. That was noticeable on my income tax return. So thank you very much to the committee.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
It's called delayed gratification.
Mr. Bell might not be moral sport in front of the Revenue Committee, but I certainly do. Senator Linehan, members of the Revenue Committee, my name is Kyle Fairburn, KYLEFAIRBAIRN. I represent the Greater Nebraska Schools Association. I represent the 24 largest school districts in the state of Nebraska. All the schools in GNSA depend heavily on equalization aid from the state. These 24 schools represent 75% of all the children in the state attending public schools. GNSA schools focus a great deal on equalization aids because we have less property value and we cannot meet the identified needs that is projected by the state solely on local property taxes. GNSA was asked
by the committee to testify regarding tax policy within the state. We have been asked to address 4 questions regarding state policy. As an individual, I have had over 25 years of experience in the state and across the country in school finance. With that said, these questions are very difficult for me to answer. I know that our tax system has a large reliance on property taxes to fund several items in local government, but I don't know if it is excessive in all parts of the state. I do know that many other states I work with have similar models to fund initiatives through property taxes, but are they more or less than Nebraska as compared to the property values and local values and quality of life? I'm not sure I can answer that question. We also have personal income taxes, corporate income taxes, pay sales taxes, just like a number of other states do. Ours are probably higher than some and lower than others in all cases, but again, that is something difficult for a school finance person to answer. Sales tax exemptions are another issue we were asked to address, and the legislature needs to decide if sales tax exemptions are right or wrong. With all that said, the one thing that I can comment on is the need for stable funding within our state to educate our children. It is true that property taxes play a different role in all districts across the state, but from being in school finance a long time, it is also the most stable of all the funding sources we receive. The state aid formula over the years has been changed several times to lower the needs and also just reduce when the state runs short on resources. There is no dedicated funding for schools set in stone as there is with items like the Highway Trust Program. The equalized schools in the state rely on the state to fund our schools equitably and adequately, and we have no recourse if the funding isn't there. Equalization aid allows our schools I represent to serve children in an equitable manner to their peers across the state. Many of you know that 85% of school costs comes from salary and benefits. This makes it very difficult to manage when your funding source suddenly is less than expected due to a change in the formula. I believe that my fellow education groups, NERCS and STANCE, will agree that having stabilized funding is the key to schools in our state. That's all I have for you.
Thank you. Senator Boster, have a question?
Thank you, Chair Linehan. Thank you, sir. So, heard you loud and clear that stable funding is important. Is there a particular revenue source that you are advocating for school funding? You mentioned property taxes being stable, but just to clarify.
Yeah, property taxes right now, Senator, they're stable. You get your budget document from the state, you get your needs, you set your needs. If your local property taxes can pay for those needs, you're done with your budget basically. In the schools I represent, you get your needs, you minus out what the local property taxes can produce, and then the state has to fund that up, or has funded that up in the past. So stable funding, Senator, is the key. And over the last 20 years, I imagine the state aid formula has been changed 15 to 18 times over those 20 years, and usually not in the better. We don't all of a sudden see more money put to state aid.
Do you have thoughts on how we could structure school funding that is being sourced from a less stable place to schools in a way that we could get some more consistency out of it?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, the legislature could set aside, the Highway Trust Fund is guaranteed money for highways every year. I mean, there's many things that could be done to stabilize the funding in school systems.
Okay. Any particular favorite options?
That's your decision, but if it's stable, I'm all for it, Senator. So
thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Boster. Senator Friesen.
Thank you, Chairwoman Linehan. So a number of times here, different testifiers have talked about if we give property tax relief, there also has to be some sort of controls to make sure it's property tax relief. So do you feel there's a fair enough safeguards in place that if more state aid to give in the schools in a different revenue source, that property tax relief will occur?
Yeah, Senator, that's a great question. We have lids right now on our property, our tax request asking. We have lids on our budget. So it's very difficult to get around those. So if there was more money put in on one side, because of our budget restraints, it's going to have to react some other way. I mean, you can't get around the budget restraints that are already in law. So whether you lowered the LER or did something different, it's still going to affect because your budgets can't go up because of the state law.
Okay, thank you.
I just have one quick.
Yes, thank you, Senator Friesen. Senator Albright.
Thank you. So you talk about stable funding. In the 25 years that you've sat in the chair you have, would you ever say that you couldn't rely on what the state has given?
Absolutely, number of times. When I was at Bellevue Public Schools, we had to cut 2 years in a row because the state cut our funding right at the end of the session, and we have to make adjustments.
So tell me how they cut your funding because they didn't have enough to.
Yep.
So.
So that's a very difficult, Senator. Again, 85% of my costs come from, everybody says, well, just, turn the lights down, don't turn the heat on at 5 in the morning, whatever that difference is, but it's such a small percentage of your budget. You have to then go in to get non-contract, non-union people and eliminate some of those positions because you really don't have any other alternative to cut your budget.
So how long ago did that happen?
It's happened numerous times over the years.
Really?
Oh, yeah. I mean, 3 years ago, state needed $42 million. The education got cut $21 million. And that went to the equalized states and the schools in the state. If you can produce what you need locally, you don't depend on equalization aid.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Senator Albright. What years were you in Bellevue when they got cut 2 years in a row?
I was there from 97 until 2010, Senator, but I'll certainly look. But yes, we did get cut at least 2 years in a row.
So that was during the Great Recession, right?
Yep, absolutely. 2009. Yep, 8,
But then
9.
wasn't there significant funding that came from the federal government in 2009?
With very specific needs and uses, Senator, yes.
And wasn't it explicit to the schools at that time that that funding was a one-time deal and wouldn't be coming back? So you still call that a cut, even though it was explained it'd just be a one-time?
It was a cut in state aid. It wasn't a cut in overall funding, Senator, but it was a cut in state aid, yes.
Okay, but.
And our funds had to be used on specific purposes.
Okay, I get that. But in 2009 or I don't have the notes in front of me. I can't remember if it's 2009 or 2010. There was a significant increase in TOSA from federal funding.
Federal funding in TOSA aid.
ARA money, thank you.
Yes, there was ARA money, but it did not replace state aid because there were specific uses for the ARA funds.
Did the ARA funding or TOSA funding in that year go up significantly?
Yes, it did.
And then and they said it was a one-time. I mean, there's letters from the Department of Ed, state school board saying that's a one-time deal. But then you now refer to that as a cut.
It was a cut in state aid, Senator.
So you do refer to that to a cut?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Explain the lid on your asking.
We have a budget limitation every year, and we have a lid on our tax asking of $1.05.
But there's no lid on the valuation increases.
No.
So out of your 24 school districts, how many of them, considering that most of the valuations have gone up significantly in the last 12 months, how many of them do you expect will cut the levies this fall?
I imagine none because it's a direct offset from state aid. So if you cut your property taxes, the state doesn't match it because it's using the LER. So you either lose it on the state or have to tax locally. That's why the state funding for TOSA has not gone up because the property values have gone up. It's a straight deduct.
I think TOSA funding has gone up, but next time I'll have more information in front of me. Thank you. Are there any other questions? Yes, Senator Pauls.
Thank you. So in other words, like say, you either have state aid or property tax, is that?
That's it.
If one goes up, the other one?
In an equalized school district, that's correct, Senator. Yep.
Okay.
So Lincoln last year, their property taxes, I believe, went up 7%. Their state aid went down 7%.
So it's actually a trade-off is what it is.
It's a trade-off.
So you really didn't gain a lot by the increase in property tax because you
No,
lost
because
this-
it's an offset in.
Yeah, I think sometimes people don't understand.
That's
that.
exactly right, Senator.
But I have a question here. I've been at this a long time. Why are we hesitant about going to the public for additional money? Let's say we had to do that on a regular basis, because I've heard the chambers think education is needed in the state. Everybody's bragging about that. Well, then why are schools afraid of, let's say we're going to go to the vote of people on some of these things?
Well, and I think, and you've seen that happen. We've had overrides in West Side and Millard.
Right.
Because they have felt it's that important to continue the education programs that they have. But it's also a very difficult decision because our property taxes are at $1.05 in most of our school districts, which is the maximum allowed by law. And to go over that, it looks like you're doing something wrong. And it's not necessarily the case, but it looks, the perception is that's the case.
But if the people really believe in your school, I would think it's called marketing.
Yep.
You know, and see, I think there's got to be a challenge out there, because so many places we're talking about, and even in the rural areas, that everything's going up and there's no control. Well, then let's make it so the school boards are forced to go to the vote of the people more often. Because here's the catch, as I talked on the floor, talking to these colleges, the people going into teaching is going downhill.
Absolutely.
Eventually, supply and demand is going to be an issue. You may say, I want to cut all this, but you just told me 85% of his salaries of the budget. I take it as a challenge. I just say, hey guys, if we're going to run a good school here, take the vote of people, take that chance. I know there's a cost to that, but now everything is done by, can't you do that all by mail? The
You
ballots?
can. There's still costs to having an election, Senator. But yeah, and I think you're going to see that because there are major teacher shortages, and not just in Omaha, but rural Nebraska. Finding teachers, qualified teachers for special education, it's almost impossible. All the West Coast schools come to Nebraska and South Dakota and North Dakota and recruit their special education teachers because there's none in California and Washington State. And so, yeah, I think it's going to come to that.
Well, but then I say, take the challenge. Let people know. If we want good schools, we have to do it. If they say no, then those communities will either blow away if they don't have teachers. I mean, I think I would accept the challenge. I would not backtrack because if you think you're good, I know some of my peers would shoot me for saying that, but if you think, go that extra mile, go that extra step, prove to the people.
And we do have, we have great schools in the state of Nebraska.
I'm not questioning that.
Yeah, and that's something, again, the business folks come up and they talk about education is a main feeder in keeping people in this state.
Right.
And I think it's very important that we do the right thing.
Then they would start selling the schools
Absolutely.
themselves. I think instead of standing on the sidelines, they'd be more, I'd say take the challenge. And if we can't do it, then we deserve what we get.
Yeah.
I know I'm sort of hard-nosed on some of that stuff.
Thank you, Senator Paul. Senator Friesen.
Thank you, Chairwoman Linehan. So over the years, we've heard the governor talk a lot about school funding, property tax, our local issue. And it's a local decision, and you're saying how important education is to communities. Should we raise the lid limit? It's been stable for a long time.
Been at $1.05 a long time, Senator. With the conversations around property taxes right now, I'm not sure if that's a doable thing, Senator. Just being frank. Again, in equalized school districts, it is a direct trade-off. I mean, whether your property taxes go up, your state aid goes down. I mean,
We were just advocating here for a vote of the people to raise your lid. So I mean, maybe we should just raise the lid.
We could get behind that.
Thank you.
The $1.05 is your general fund, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So many of the schools are at a higher levy than $1.05.
Yes, absolutely.
So I think Elkhorn's at $1.40.
Right, and that's almost all bonding, because, I mean, they're adding 500 kids a year. My biggest school in
Yeah, I'm
Bellevue is,
familiar with Elkhorn. So the formula, the basics of the formula are pretty simple, though everybody says it's very complicated, and you pointed that out. When valuations go up, aid drops. So isn't that what happened to agriculture?
in what way, Senator?
In their valuations went up, so that's why we have 170 schools with no equalization
That's,
aid.
yep.
So do you support basic funding? So some of those schools would get funding?
Not in the way it's set up right now, Senator, because they can produce all they need locally, and the schools I represent can't. If Stiosa was firm on where it was at, absolutely, but it hasn't proven to
Excuse
be
me,
that point.
Firm in where it's at. What do you mean firm?
Firm that it's funded first and over the top, because our schools can't live without it.
Has TIOSA funding been cut the last 3 years in legislature?
No.
Thank you. Are there other questions? Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi. My name's Aaron Plas, AARONPLAS. I'm the superintendent at Lakeview Community Schools in Columbus and the current president of Schools Taking Action for Nebraska Children's Education, also known as STANCE. STANCE is comprised of 19 mid-sized school districts free of lobbyists that represents over 25,000 school children in Nebraska. STANCE is unique in the fact that we represent the entire state, from Chadron all the way to Blair, districts that have a $1.05 levy down to 67 cents, and enrollments from 900 to 4,000. We are representative of Nebraska education. We do not take our positions lightly on legislative issues or testimony. STANCE really appreciates the opportunity to testify at this hearing, and I'd like to begin by thanking Chair Linehan and the Revenue Committee for having us. While we're very flattered to be here testifying for this hearing on the structure of different taxing sources, we would also like to acknowledge that we're not tax policy experts. On the other hand, we do believe we can speak on taxation as it pertains to education. We're often active on taxation bills related to education, but rarely when they're not. With that said, my testimony is geared towards answering the questions posed from your committee from the vantage point of the schools represented by STANCE. The first question asked in the invitation about the tax system in Nebraska and the areas of potentially needed reform. Property taxes are very clearly an area of focus as it pertains to school funding, and we continue to believe there's an over-reliance on property taxes to adequately fund our schools, and we've testified on that in the past with other bills. In stating this, we concurrently believe that there's a direct result of the current school funding model, which makes property taxes the only stable source of funding for our schools. Without different revenue sources, we believe there are few sustainable options to reduce property taxes while also adequately delivering the high-quality educational services our stakeholders and communities expect. We know that it's been said several times today, and we expected that the rhetoric that schools are overspending, which is also a direct result of high property taxes, but we also feel that that's a very narrow view on a super complex topic. Schools have increased their average yearly expenses below the state expenditures over the last 10 years. In addition, schools have many expenditure and revenue caps and lids, as discussed previously, that ensure there are reasonable parameters and oversight. Each school district also has a locally elected board of education that represents and holds accountable to the local constituents. There are also many practices, procedures, and laws which reinforce the transparency that schools provide to their local communities. STANCE is very open to finding solutions, any type of solutions that are out there, and any shifts in funding education, as long as it's maintained as some type of stable funding source without any additional caps and lids and restrictions. For our organization to take a formal position, though, we would need an actual bill to examine, since there are often much gray area and concepts are different maybe than what materializes in actual bill language. The next question that was asked was to provide information about the expansion of the sales tax base by eliminating exemptions and adding specific services. As an educational group, we are not tax policy experts and cannot provide any type of detailed assessment on tax exemptions, But within our school systems, we know our boards of education are always looking at revenues and expenses and examining the cost and benefits of those different decisions, strategies, and actions. This process happens all the time, and it's necessary to ensure our school systems are functioning as our community would expect. During preparations for this testimony, I'm not certain if this is correct or not, but I counted 91 tax exemptions currently offered by the state of Nebraska. It seems prudent that our state would look at those 91 exemptions and any lost revenue they may generate just to determine if the benefit is worth the cost. Several years ago, STANS and other education groups worked closely with Senator Breezy on LB 1084. That particular plan looked at several state tax exemptions, and STANS is at the table during the development of that legislation. We continue to be eager to be involved in any genuine conversations geared towards finding solutions. If the sales tax is expanded, how should any new revenue stream be utilized was the third question asked. Our education-based group would be remiss not to believe that additional money into the educational system to create a reliable funding mechanism and reduce the over-reliance on property taxes would be a prudent use of any additional state tax revenues. With that said, again, STANS is not an expert in tax policy. Therefore, in this testimony, you've noticed we've avoided wading too deeply into the intricacies of tax policy, other than the perceived role we see for future school funding solutions. So in conclusion, STANS supports policy that promotes a stable and reliable system of funding that both improves the availability of funding for schools and is free of unreasonable additional caps, lids, or restraints. We realize the burden of taxes on our local patrons and are always open to ideas that ensure a high quality education for our students while keeping taxation associated with education reasonable. Thanks for the opportunity to be here and be happy to try to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the committee? Senator Friesen.
Thank you, Chairwoman Linehan. So in the past, STANS has always opposed giving any more money to non-equalized schools. So if we broaden our tax base, now sales tax base, and put more money to schools, are you still going to be opposed giving money to non-equalized schools, or does it all have to go to equalized schools?
I don't know that STANS has been opposed to money not going to non-equalized schools. Sometimes in those situations, we've had to take a neutral stance because we have.
I don't remember any favorable testimony, any of the different things we've had here, is there? So
we're typically neutral because we have non-equalized and equalized. And if, when there's specific bills that come through, we look at them as a group. And if we can't come to a consensus, then we may end up taking neutral testimony in every school kind of.
So there hasn't been support.
Yeah, we've been neutral on those generally.
So would they take a neutral stand on where the money goes if they expanded funding?
If there was a specific bill that had that we could examine and look at how it affect all of the 19 schools, we could be support, opposed, or neutral, just depending on what the language of that specific bill was.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Friesen. Other questions, Senator Pauls.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking over the group of schools that are under your leadership. And just by looking at these names and having been to all of these towns, I see them as sort of like little hubs. They have to, and for them to survive, they have to have good schools. So I would think that that the individuals living in those towns would support even taking a vote on increasing monies for schools. I would assume they would.
I think the communities that STANS represents are generally very supportive of education. Every 2 years they go to the ballot or the polls and they elect boards of education as well. And I know in these small communities, our boards of education, they're ingrained in the community and they're hearing if people believe that there's anything going on in the school that they don't like. And so, I think in some ways every couple of years, our communities go to the polls and figure out what's going on in the school, if they're okay or not.
So they're very involved, what you're telling me, for the most part. I'd be honest, several weeks ago at a Millard board meeting, one of the board members was absent and people clapped because it was dealing with the mask and all that. So I commend the school board. So many times we get on them because, quote, they're spending all this money. But if they are part of that community, they have a lot of neighbors who'd probably talk to them if they think they're overdoing it. That part irritates me when we act like all this money that's being spent by the local in these local communities, like by some foreign group that's coming in, people who live there.
We have a lot of respect for our boards as well. It's a tough job, and especially in smaller communities like we represent in Stance, and they do a great job of making decisions that are best for their school and community.
Thank you for your information.
Thank you, Senator Pauls. Are there other questions? I think just clear the disconnect here on, I think Stance and NERCSA did support Senator Breezy's 1084, but part of then the disconnect came along when we went to 974. We didn't have a dedicated revenue source, right? That's where we disconnected, I believe.
It's been a few years, but I think that's correct.
couple
As
of
it
years,
continued
yes.
to be amended,
Right.
things changed.
Right. So part of the, I just want to add this because part of that was they didn't know where we would come up with the 524 million in the third year of that program. And we're now in what would have been the second year, and we're at 538 million in the property tax, income tax relief. So we would have had the money.
Yeah.
Other questions? Thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you guys.
We're gonna, we think there's only 3 more testifiers, so we're just going, wait. 3, so we're not gonna break for lunch, we're just gonna push through here.
Let's just say if there's no questions, I can hold the way down.
No.
Morning, Senator Linehan and members of the Revenue Committee. My name is Jack Moles. That's JACKMOLES. I'm the Executive Director of the Nebraska Rural Community Schools Association, also known as NERCSA. NERCSA last year was made up of 213 member institutions, including 197 rural public schools, 13 ESUs, and the 3 state colleges. Our public school members have a combined student population of almost 85,000 students. This year, we expect to be at 216 members, 200 of them public schools, rural public schools. On behalf of NERCSA, I would like to express my appreciation to Senator Linehan for inviting us to provide testimony in reference to LR 261. NERCSA believes that the portion of the tax system that is most in need of significant reform is property taxes. We do believe that there is an over-reliance on property taxes to fund our public schools, especially in our rural public schools. As ag land valuations skyrocketed, the number of non-equalized districts grew from 48 in 2008, 2009 to a high of 178 in 2017-18. Currently, this year, 157 out of 244 school districts do not receive equalization aid. Most of these non-equalized districts are rural districts, and most of them are members of NERCSA. Not a good selling point for NERCSA, I guess. In 2008, 2009, Class C and D size schools, and for that I use NSAA basketball classifications, received almost $163 million in equalization aid. This year, those schools receive a little over $69 million in equalization aid. Most of those districts, however, have long lost any equalization aid that they were getting. During that same time frame, of course, their expenses, operating costs did not go down. Thus, they have been forced by the state of Nebraska's school funding system to become so overly reliant on property taxes. It is the belief of NERCSA that if state funding were to be made available to non-equalized districts, that property taxes would be lowered in most cases. One of the outcomes of the reduced number of school districts receiving equalization aid is something I call it the compounded effect of lost equalization aid on the property owners in these districts. And to explain this concept, I'm going to use Ainsworth Public Schools. I gave you another sheet there, and I just have a couple sample school districts there, but I'm going to concentrate on Ainsworth as the example. In 2007 and 2008, the district received $2.4 million in equalization aid. The next year, they received $1.987 million, a loss of $433,000. The local property owners had to make up for that lost state aid. The next year, the district lost $256,000. And again, the property owners had to make up for that loss. However, they also had to again still make up for the $433,000 they'd lost the year before. Thus, in year two, the property owners had to make up for a combined loss of $689,000 over a 2-year period. The next year, the district lost another $244,000 in equalization aid. Couple that with the $689,000 from the year before. They had to make up for a loss of $934,000 in equalization aid over a 3-year period. Now, if we extrapolate that over out through this year, the combined amount of the total property or that the local property owners had to make up in lost equalization aid over the 13-year period is $24 million. This example is repeated in most of our rural districts today. Like I said, I provided a few other examples of that. The compounded effect of lost equalization aid on local property owners has been caused especially by growing ag land valuations over a period of time and a school funding system that, in our opinion, was not able to react to that phenomenon. NERCSA does believe that sales taxes would be a good starting point for the senators to consider in an attempt to provide true property tax relief. Eliminating some sales tax exemptions and also adding some services or products to the base is likely needed. We're part of a group called Nebraskans United, which is made up of all of the major education groups and most of the major ag groups. We did work, as stated earlier, we did work with Senator Breezy on LB 1084 and LB 314. And those bills did provide ways in which the sales tax base could be broadened through both the elimination of some exemptions as well as, new sales taxes on selected services. NERCSA would encourage you to again revisit those bills to look at ways in which you might consider using.
Mr. Bowles.
Yes. Thank you.
Are there questions from the committee? What year did the ARA funds come to the state?
It seemed to me they were like 2010, 2011, somewhere in there.
Okay, well, we need to get this.
8 and 9, okay. Yeah, okay.
7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so that did affect the school funding, did it not?
Yes.
And weren't you told, I think this is my recollection when I went back and looked at this, that in one of those years, at least if not two of them, that funding was more than you would get the following year?
Yes.
Okay, so when you have these numbers here and they go down, the year you're missing is the year before they went up, right? Then the other question I have just on numbers, GNSA says they have 75% of the students in public schools. So that's around, you're all counting, I assume you're all counting preschoolers too, right? It's not just K through 12. When your student population, you're saying you have 85,000 students. That includes preschool, right?
I'm going to say, I think it does. We just use the numbers off the state of the NDE website.
Okay, well, they do both.
Yeah.
So I know this is the problem with numbers playing around. So if you have 85,000 and Stance has 25,000, that's 110,000.
Well, one thing I would tell you there, senators, we do have overlap of members. There are members some of the members of Stance, for example, are members of NERCSA also.
And I think some of the members of GNSA are members of Stance.
Yes.
Because I see Columbus on here. So that's how we're coming up with more children than we actually have.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
that was confusing to me.
Growing the population.
Yeah. Okay, double counting. I get it. All right, any other questions? All right, thank you very much for being here.
Good afternoon,
Good
members of the
afternoon.
Revenue Committee. It's good to be with you. For the record, my name is John Hansen, John, Hansen, Hansen. I'm the president of Nebraska Farmers Union. We're the second oldest, second largest general farm organization in the state. Thank you for the invitation to be here today. I've tried speed reading my testimony and I would be over if I tried it. So let me pick a few of the things. I've got the responses. And if you know our organization, they're pretty predictable responses to the questions. And I would draw your attention to several things in the testimony and a couple of things not. But an issue that I have run into for a long time, and I'm just going to share it with the committee, but it's out there. And so relative to agriculture and tax policy, when you look at the variables that we have to pay in order to do our business, one of the things that is, considered a capital investment, but it's certainly from our perspective is an input, and that is that you can't really farm or ranch without land. And so it is an annual cost that you incur every year, and you either pay for it in rent or you pay for it in terms of your purchase costs, and you amortize it over time. But it certainly is an input. So the issue that our members raise, and have raised for a long time, is that we are rightly not taxing inputs on manufacturing, and we strongly support that position. That's good tax policy. And yet, in the case of ag, the way that we get treated in tax policy is that even though that is one of the inputs that we have to pay for every year, one way or the other, that it is a kind of an input, not precisely the same, but sort of comparable. But so I just want to raise that issue with the committee and just say that's out there and it's something to kind of think about. So in terms of how heavy the hand of taxation is on that particular variable, it has a lot to do with whether or not we're profitable or not. So the point of our organization and all of the other ag organizations who are constantly talking about property taxes is, if we're a high risk, low margin operation on a good day. And so we still get, when you look at the USDA data, we still get the majority of our net farm family earned income from off-farm sources. And the Secretary of Ag has been talking about more of that lately, but it's an issue we've raised for a long time. So here we are, borrowing all this money, taking all this risk, and yet our spouses are the ones who bring home the bacon in order to be able to buy the bacon. And so that's why our number one focus continues to be on property taxes. That's the issue that I hear as I go across the state is property taxes. It's not income or sales. So while we made a lot of progress, I want to kind of stick with that. The other thing is, and I wearing a different hat in terms of some of my national organization experience, is that as you look at trade policy, for example, which is one of the organizations that I work, I've been on the board of the Coalition for Prosperous America, but it is made up of domestic manufacturers, organized labor, and agriculture. And so, we're increasingly looking at the nuts and bolts of trade policy and how it is that we level the playing field. And we've got some good economists on board. And one of the things that comes out of that is that it is really important for the economic health of America that we have domestic manufacturing and that we really focus on that. And that when they're profitable, they generate new jobs, new wealth, new tax revenues, all of those things. And I would just take that comparison to domestic manufacturing and also remember that in the case of ag, we have a very different funding and a very different spending attitude when we're barely scraping by. And so as you look at us as a part of the Nebraska economy, when we're profitable, when we have money to spend, by God, we go to town and we spend it. That's ag. My grandpa always said, if you want a farmer to go to town and spend $100, give him $50 and tell him it looks like rain. And so that's what we do. We invest, we buy back, we improve, we buy equipment, we buy machinery. we improve buildings, we do all of those things. And so it's important for ag, and it's important for our state, for ag to not only just exist, but also to be profitable so we can be the economic driver that our state wants and needs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hanson. Other questions from the committee? Mr. Boster, Senator Boster. Ugh,
Thank you, Chair Linehan.
you can call me
Thank you,
Mr.
Mr. Hanson. In advocating for ag property to be viewed as a business input, are you advocating for the abolition of property taxes on ag property?
I'm not, but I'm telling you that that view is out in the country, and they look at it and say, you know, our tax system is completely out of whack. And, you know, we keep raising this issue over and over. And so while some progress has been made, and they appreciate that, there's still a view that, and I think it's rightly so when you look at the comparison data, that our state continues to still have, despite the progress we've made, an over-reliance on property. But when you ride a horse too hard, finally the horse just, you know, is either going to balk or buck. And so there's certainly that view out there that, you know, that ag land valuations have been allowed to, you know, rise to the point that they look at the inequity of rural schools and say, you know, we're paying the whole load. You know, they've sort of taken advantage of the inability of the TIOSA formula to be able to make the necessary internal adjustments to accommodate the increased valuation of land. And so there are folks out there who say, well, yeah, you know, if you keep abusing that tax, then maybe it's, you know, should go away. I think that the better view is to continue to hope for remedy and progress and come up with a more fair and balanced tax system that really does get us back to something that is more consistent with the three legs of the stool.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Boster. Are there other questions? Would you, along with your lining that it's a business input, wouldn't commercial buildings be a business input in the same manner?
Yep.
So would you think that maybe commercial property and should be treated like ag is when it's valuation? Because that's always, I think, been one of the issues we face. You have ag at 75%, but commercial 100%. They're both businesses. So have you given any thought to whether maybe commercial and ag should be put together? And maybe we get from 75% to 50%?
Yeah, and I'm familiar with those arguments, those discussions. And, you know, the amount of capital investment that ag has to pay compared to the price of a building. There's also
and the land the building sits on.
Right. Yep. And so it's you know, we're in my neighborhood right now, you know, it's well over $1 million a quarter would be the going price of land. So it's a huge capital investment compared to, so what is the earnings capacity of the businesses? And so
I'm thinking
yeah,
that is
it gets
no.
complicated.
No. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Other questions? Thank you.
Thank you very much and good luck and congratulations on your work this week.
Sounds good. Our job would be easier.
Hello.
Good afternoon. Jessica Shelburne, JESSICA-SHELBURN. I am the last person standing between you guys and most of you getting out of here. So I will keep this very short. I'm the State Director of Americans for Prosperity. I've been in front of the committee several times. You know my spiel. We would agree with a lot of what the Chamber had institute, what they had to say. While we appreciate everything that the Revenue Committee has attempted to do over the years, that the governor has attempted to do, there is still work that needs to be done. We've taken a piecemeal approach for several years, and we believe that it's time for that comprehensive, transformative approach. That is an approach that is not easy. You have your work cut out for you, as you've seen for the last several years. We believe that going to a flat income rate with a corporate rate that is in line with that income rate, personal income tax rate, would be ideal. Would make us more competitive with our surrounding states. We also believe that we do need to broaden our sales tax. Everything should be on the table, as we've discussed before. But in broadening that sales tax rate, broadening the sales tax base, we need to lower that rate. Which also means there's less revenue coming in. But we have a ton of money that we've been spending on incentives. We have a ton of money that we have been spending on property tax relief, which, as has been discussed earlier, that's a local issue. That is levied by the locals. While the state has done an amazing job of trying to limit our expenditures and get things more in line, there is still work to be done. The local political subdivisions who are levying taxes need to come into line with the state and realize that there is an importance with that. We would all agree that property taxes is largely driven by education. We would like to see more of a basic funding. A funding follows the student. It's reliable, it's dependable. If we can make the transformative tax reform changes that we've discussed and that several organizations have been proposing today, I think that you would be able to find that sustainable funding so that the state could provide that funding for K-12 education that we are on the hook for, and do it in a more equitable manner so that those schools who aren't receiving much funding are now receiving some state funding, and it's not solely dependent on their local property taxes. With that, I will wrap up so you guys can get out of here unless you have questions.
Thank you. Are there questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
We have one letter for the record, I'm being told. Two, actually. It was Lincoln Chamber of Commerce and NACO. Okay, thank you all for being here, and we are